Catherine, do you have enough equipment to call roll? Sure. Okay, so in that case, let's go ahead and get the meeting started, and then we can get on with some public comment. So I'd like to officially call the meeting to order for the Palo Alto Parks and Recreations Commission for August 27th. And we'd like to have the roll called, please.
Stacy Ashland. Here. Deidre Cromie. Here. Abby Knopper. Here. Ed Lowing.
Here.
Pat Markovich.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
He's here.
Greg Schmidt. I'm here too. Did I not call? Oh, sorry. Jennifer Hedderly.
Okay, thank you. The next item is to take a look at potential agenda changes, requests, and deletions. And I would like to swap items 4 and 5 on the published agenda, just to talk about the capital improvement plan overall in the annual budget before we get into a specific capital improvement plan, which is Scott Park. Is that okay with the commission? Yep. Okay, so we're going to swap 4 and 5. 5 becomes 4. Are there any other changes, requests, or deletions? Okay, seeing none, then the next item of business is oral communication, and any member of the public can address the commission on any subject. Any of you who have come in late and would like to address the commission on any subject, agenda or otherwise, please pick up a speaker's card, submit it to Catherine down here, and then we'll call on you at the appropriate time. I have one speaker card for someone who's speaking on something that's not on the agenda, and that's Ann Levin from Palo Alto Dog Owners. And we always restrict our comments to about 3 minutes given tonight's crowd. We like to stay to that. So, Ann, yes, and hopefully that's on. I see a red light.
Hello, I am Ann Levin.
I'm not sure it's on. Okay.
Is it on? Yes. Hello, I am Ann Levin, a resident of Diamond Court in Palo Alto. As the membership chair and a board member of Palo Alto Dog Owners, I look forward to learning more about the City of Palo Alto Parks master planning effort. Representing nearly 300 members and growing, Palo Alto Dog Owners are pleased to have an opportunity to see to it that future park planning take greater consideration of the recreational and social needs of dogs and their owners. For me, as a relatively new resident of Palo Alto, the dog run at Hoover Park has been very helpful for me and my husband in getting to know many of our neighbors. While we are thankful to have a dog run at Hoover Park, we know that the facilities for dog recreation throughout Palo Alto are really lacking. We hope that this park master planning effort will identify many opportunities for additional dog runs and hopefully one or more larger dog recreation areas. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself and our group.
Great, thank you.
Chair Long, is there a button there in front of you?
Is there what?
The button.
There's this thing. I think that's just a timer.
IT just advised it can only be turned on, that speaker mic, by up here. Which one is it? He didn't say, he didn't know. And he's not able to project onto that big screen for our park.
Well, this isn't even on, so.
What's that?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's off.
Let's shut everybody down. That's moving here.
These are all the council members.
Any of these?
Is there?
Now I've turned on the light.
I think you just voted, Jennifer.
I think I voted maybe.
Yeah, it's maybe. So, okay.
What we can do is have members of the public.
Okay,
Okay.
that's good.
So then you have to use these buttons, right, to turn them on? The ones next to him? Or do, oh no. Go independent. I don't know what those buttons are. Rob, would you test that mic right next to you, make sure that works?
Testing.
Okay, great.
Right, thank you.
So when we get to other speakers, I'll have to come up to this table here and speak in the microphone next to our city liaison, Rob DeGuse. Okay, screaming right along here now. We can get moving. So the first item of actual business is approval of draft minutes from the July 23rd meeting. So those have been circulated in advance. I would take any comments or corrections from commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Cromie.
Thank you. I'd like to make a couple comments. On number 5, the golf course reconfiguration project update. On line 80, I think I'd like to add in that there were comments and concerns expressed around the Baylands Athletic Center expansion, in addition to around the tree mitigation, and we need to fix the language on line 80 because it says concerns were expressed around the tree loss, planting, environmental. So we just need to correct that to say concerns were expressed around the proposed tree mitigation and the Baylands Athletic Center expansion. And then I'd also like to clarify that there's a sentence that follows on line 80 that says tree mitigation will be coming back to the commission, and I believe that was a request based on the public input that several commissioners requested that. I don't think it was planned, and I think what's going on in the minutes is that sometimes there's not a distinction between what staff is saying and what commissioners are saying. I noticed it I'm going to bring it up in another place in the minutes, and I think that it should be distinguished when possible. That's my recollection of what happened. And then I also would like to make a correction on line 82 that Cromie and Ashland plan to attend the Planning Commission meeting to learn more. I'd like to strike to listen because I think it was implied that we were going to do more than listen. So if we can just strike that and just say to learn more. What I decided at that meeting was I was going to read the DEIR. And so I stated I was going to read it and then go to participate at the PTC meeting. You don't need all of that captured in the minutes, but just so at least it wasn't implied it was only passive, that because the DEIR was 464 pages. So, okay, so moving on to line 84 on the next page. There's a statement there that says stockpiling of soil to build a golf course needs, I think you want an S there, needs 20,000 cubic feet by April 2014. It is essential to start now. And that was a staff comment. And again, I feel like it's a little bit, we need to just discern between whether we're saying that in discussion or whether that's presented to us. So I'd just like that clarified because I don't believe that was part of our discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Cromie. And that was a staff comment there, and also I would just add that it's 400,000 cubic yards of soil, and it's for the golf course and the levee project.
And then under number 6 on page 94, where it says Monroe Park, the community meeting tentatively set for August 12th, I'd like it in the minutes that Commissioner Cromie said the Monroe Park neighborhood had not been notified of that community meeting.
As of that date.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for me.
Yes, Commissioner Ashland.
On line 96, it just says El Camino Park, and there's nothing there. I don't recall what the details were there, but I'm sure there was more than a mention of it as a park project. There was some sort of update. Is it possible to get
I think there wasn't an update. That was actually...
Then it wouldn't be listed. So, I mean, it either should have a summary or it shouldn't.
Yeah, I think I have to remember back now, but I think we just sort of reiterated the memo, reiterated to the commission the memo that went to council asking them for direction.
Right, but there was no news. That's what I meant.
There was no new news.
Right.
Then if we could add that, that would be great. Thanks.
Sorry, was that it? Yeah. Want to go next, Commissioner Hederle? Oh, that's right, okay. No. Oh, sorry, no. Okay. Actually, just below that, where we were reading, so on 99, I'm not sure exactly that it was called the Howard Hoffman Dog Meeting, but I don't know what else to call it. He was one of the participants, so. I know we're experimenting with various formats of the meetings to be, not too laborious and so on, but.
The minutes?
I'm sorry.
Right.
But a lot of these are, there's 3 or 4 sentences together, and a long presentation from Ms. Corsten ended up with only something about revenue went up for 13. So I think, from my standpoint, we've gone a little bit too far on being terse relative to capturing, important points. And for example, she raised a lot of very good and important points in terms of the work that's being done in recreation. So I would lobby for a little bit more extensive, as opposed to kind of almost bullet points.
Yeah, we'll work on that. I mean, what we're trying to do is sort of streamline the process and recognize that not every agenda item needs quite as much detail. And so a presentation from a recreation staff member, at least our thinking was that didn't need a whole lot of information. Probably more than this. I agree with that. But it's just it's a time constraint for staff to work on these minutes. So we're just playing with some new efficiency.
And then actually the last thing is that we didn't have those representatives as an ad hoc committee. That came up during announcements when they went to PTC. So I think they were just interested commissioners, and we have them listed as ad hoc, so that probably shouldn't be. 81. Okay, can we have a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
Can I make one more addition
Okay.
that I neglected to mention? On line 105, it just says Mitchell Park, and it should say Mitchell Park Library.
Okay. A motion to approve the minutes as corrected, made by, I move.
Second.
Okay. Did you get those?
You moved?
Keith?
I moved.
Keith?
She's
Okay.
Commissioner Hederle abstains because she wasn't here. Otherwise, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. The next item of agenda is a draft tree mitigation plan for the Palo Alto Golf Course reconfiguration project to be led by Walter Passmore. Would it be helpful to have public comment before or after in this case?
I think it's always helpful to have a staff presentation first to give some context and frame the conversation, discussion, and then have public comment. And it's helpful for the public too, I think, to hear
Works for
comments.
me. Okay with other commissioners?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
great.
I'd like to invite Walter Passmore to come up here. He's the urban forester for the city of Palo Alto, and is leading the team of people working on a mitigation plan for the impacts to trees on the golf course reconfiguration project. So, Walter.
Thank you, Commissioners. This is really an update on a process that continues to evolve as the golf course reconstruction nears. So I'm really just going to provide an outline, and then hopefully that's a format for some questions. And I do see that we have a couple members of our constituent group in the audience, so I hope they can also lend some perspective on how we're progressing on this mitigation plan. What we've done thus far is to prioritize strategies to replace a package of environmental benefits. And we know that even though trees of the species and stature and number probably would not occur in the Baylands, they still provide a lot of environmental values. And so the mitigation strategy seeks to replace those values. Our priority is first to replace those values on site. We want to replace the same sorts of things as close to where they're being removed or damaged as possible. That's, I think, one of the primary definitions of mitigation. Our second priority is to replace near site, so same ecosystem. We want to replace values in the Baylands ecosystem that are very closely aligned with what's going to be removed. Third is try to identify some additional near site locations, whether they may be in East Palo Alto or other public facilities, and maybe close to a Baylands ecosystem, but not within that. And then lastly is off-site mitigation, where we try to replace trees for trees, but not necessarily in the same ecosystem. So using those priorities, we established some values and guiding principles. One that came out of our constituent group was the idea of do no harm. So whatever we do, we want it to be a benefit to the ecosystem that we're placing it in. We don't want to establish trees just to come up with numbers. And so that was a very important guiding principle, do no harm. And second, we want some kind of an incremental improvement to a number of different things. And we've discussed with our constituent group the benefits of trees for habitat, for function, what they provide for individual sites, for the environmental benefits such as carbon sequestration, clean air, clean water, et cetera, et cetera. So that whole laundry list of benefits that trees provide. And the approach, like I said before, has been evolving because it's not a direct apple for apple. We cut X number of trees in the golf course, so we replace X number of trees into the Baylands, because that conflicts with that do no harm principle, where we would be planting more trees than the Baylands ecosystem would typically sustain. So that's why we've been interpreting our code and policy to try to come up with the best possible approach. We have had input from, I think, a pretty broad-ranging constituent group, including thus far Canopy, Actera, Audubon, Magic, Sierra Club, the Native Plant Society, and some advocates of both the Baylands ecosystem and the Foothills ecosystem. We've also tried to reference some pertinent research on successful projects to make sure that we're not designing a strategy that is untested and is risky as far as being able to meet our goals to replace all of these values. And I know I'm speaking in general terms, but like I said, it's not as easy as replacing tree for tree or canopy for canopy, because we have trees that would never have naturally occurred in the Baylands that we're trying to replace a value for. And finally, we've been talking about the feasibility for implementation. We have to obviously work within constraints of budget, of staff, of land area, of the capabilities of our partner groups to actually plant trees, take care of trees, and replenish these benefits that are being lost because of tree removals at the golf course. So that's my overview, and I'd be glad to answer any questions, and I hope I've done a good job of introducing some of the comments from the public as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we should go to public comment. There's going to be a crowd at the microphone there, though, so.
go to that microphone right there.
There's this other little dude up here.
Or do you want to move over? Yeah.
This is it? This one? Okay, great. So we have quite a number of speakers tonight, and there are about 4 or 5 on tree mitigation. The first one is Eileen McLaughlin. And again, just remind, we have about 3 minutes per speaker.
Good evening. I'm Eileen McLaughlin with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. And I want to talk to you about briefly about some thoughts about the, using the mitigation resources to improve Bixby Park. That park certainly can use a lot of enrichment, and if there's ways to do that, I strongly recommend that you try to find a way to do that, and not all with trees. There can be a lot of, if the mitigation can be in lower growing shrubbery throughout the park, native shrubbery, that would be most beneficial. I was personally involved with the project that happened up in Menlo Park's Bayfront Park. And if you might recall, they had a big tree project plan there, and there are learnings from that project that are useful here. One of them was that they were it's a location of a landfill next to a tidal wetland, very much like what we have here. And the issue there is that if you have trees near the edge of, say, Bixby Park, you're providing perches to predators immediately over the wetlands, which is a great hazard, and you have clapper rails, endangered species out there. So if there's any trees, that they're placed well back from the edges of Bixby Park. So location is important as to where they're placed. Also the choice of trees with low canopies where they are placed, so that you do not have a tall canopy where the hawks might specialize in sitting on a spiking tree and use it as a branch for overlook, even from a more distant part of the park. Then also that the tree selection, if your trees are chosen, needs to remember it's a landfill, and you've got to figure out which trees have roots that are not going to penetrate that landfill. So there's, if you're, I really endorse improving Bixby, but there's some learnings that need to be followed that came from that plan that you could use here. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for being efficient with the time. It's working. I think it's fine. Okay, the next speaker is Linda Ruthruff. Did I say that correctly? Ruthruff.
Good evening. I'm Linda Ruthruff. I'm the chair of the Conservation Committee for the local chapter of the California Native Plant Society. I want to express my appreciation that we are being included in this process. We are delighted that our input has been heard, and that we're starting to look at putting in a mitigation that is more appropriate. It's easy to put in a tree for a tree, but if you're expending that amount of money and effort, it's best to put in an enhanced environmental mitigation rather than something that didn't really belong there to begin with. So while we are losing something that has become adaptive, by putting in other types of vegetation, such as bushes, we're going to get a much better return for our investment. Of course, we encourage you to use native plants because you're right there next to the refuge, and you're going to get the most environmental appropriate return and the best habitat enhancement. And anytime you enhance habitat, you also enhance people's appreciation of being outdoors. A non-native plant very often doesn't attract anything, and you'll have the native plant and it will be alive with bird life, with insect life, with butterflies, and so you enhance everyone's appreciation and enjoyment. One of our concerns is that You have chosen for the grass that's going to be used on the golf course, seashore paspalum, which is an American East Coast native grass, and it's been selected for its salt tolerance and ability to thrive on irrigation with recycled water. Unfortunately, this also makes it very likely that this will become an invasive problem here. It's going to be very easy for it to escape and get into the marsh habitat. We used to get money from the state for weed control. We don't get that anymore, so all of the weed management folks are stretched pretty thin, and it disturbs me that on a weekend we'll have people out pulling, say, pampas grass. Meanwhile, at the big box store, somebody's buying more pampas grass and putting it in. It feels kind of futile. So I would really like to encourage you to figure out a different grass to use, because we know the potential for this being something where we're going to have to get a lot of volunteers to try and correct a problem that could be corrected before it starts. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. The next speaker is Emily Renzel.
Good evening, Chair Lowing and members of the Parks and Recreation Commission. Tonight I'm speaking on behalf of the Baylands Conservation Committee regarding the golf course mitigation update. We've met with staff and other interested parties and are in continuing discussions on this. We are concerned with the huge loss of trees at the golf course in the Baylands. Ideally, mitigation for all these losses would occur in the Baylands. Replacing some of the lost trees in the Enid Pearson Arrastradero Preserve is okay, but we would much prefer for the mitigation resources to be used to landscape Bixby Park. City policy allows for other landscape materials to replace trees. Shrubs, grasses, and other plant materials could be used very successfully to enhance Bixby Park, along with some tree plantings in the right places. I concur with the remarks by both Eileen and Linda, who preceded me. Please consider asking for some of the mitigation to occur on Bixby Park. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's the last speaker card I have on this topic. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. Okay. So then I'd like to open it up to commissioner comments on the issue.
There we go. Could you just speak about the grass that was just discussed in the previous comment for a moment, about the nature and aggressiveness of it?
I think Rob may be able to speak to the grass better than I can.
Yeah, not as well as maybe others that are not here. Really, our superintendent, Joe Valaire of Parks and Golf, was being most closely involved with selecting the grass variety. Very challenging location to grow grass. It's a very high salt soils out there. So, we spent a lot of time looking at different options. Paspalum platinum, the grass that has been chosen, is one that is used, extensively at golf courses and golf courses close by bays and seas. And in fact, we have paspalum on the golf course now in large parts of the course. We haven't experienced any sort of invasiveness of the paspalum, but it's a new concern that we're just hearing now, and we want to understand the concern better. So we're reaching out to a variety of experts to give us feedback on this, as well as the environmental impact report, which really needs to look at things like that, the grass that's chosen and what is the impact. And if there is, potential impact, we need to know about it now so we can, mitigate or make other choices. Okay.
If you look at the parks and open spaces, the number of trees in the past, let's say 5 years, is it constant? Are we naturally growing new trees, or are the population decreasing right now?
We don't have a real firm inventory on our open space land. We do have a good idea of park land, within the city limits. So parkland, the tree inventory has been holding very constant for quite a few years. And in open space, I suspect that it's been fairly constant, but that's more just general observation than any kind of data-backed finding.
Okay. And if we were to plant new trees, what size would they be? 2 feet tall, 10 feet tall? What size would we be planting?
Generally in our developed areas, we spec 15 gallon, which is about a 5 to 7 foot tree. But for our open space, we've found that the smaller we go, the quicker the trees adapt to the site, and the lower the cost of establishment. We get a better success rate and end up having a much stronger tree end result. So we'd plant something from acorn size to very small seedling, so less than 2 feet tall.
And how many of those survive, let's say 5 years?
With supplemental water and a number of techniques to aid in survival and keep the deer from eating them, we can expect 80 to 90% survival.
And how much would it cost to plant those small trees out in the open space?
It's a very time-consuming process, so even though the seedlings are very low cost themselves, the actual site preparation and planting and monitoring and watering is where you generate a lot of the cost. And our partner group, Actera, projects that average seedling cost is somewhere around $100 by the time you get them established and they can thrive on their own.
And is that done by a contractor? Is that done by city staff or volunteers? How is it split up?
We would envision that our partners can help us with some of that. So Actera has some staff that they can assign work like that to. They also work with some contractors that they have longstanding relationship with. The same can be said for Canopy as a partner group, and then staff would be able to make up some of the difference. All of the details have yet to be determined because we need to figure out how many trees exactly we're planting, what the exact locations, what the species are, locate seed. There's a lot of planning that goes into it before you actually put a tree in the ground.
And do we have any active programs for planting in the open spaces right now, or is it just hands off and let nature take its course?
There are some. They're not as large scale as what we would be talking about for the golf course mitigation, but there's some amount of planting that occurs on open space on an annual basis.
Okay, I'm done.
So I think the values and the do no harm principles that you enumerated make a lot of sense. But I also think that it's important that as alternatives take form, there's some avenue for public discussion of the pros and cons of various alternatives. So my question to you is, what is the process for reviewing mitigation alternatives as you move forward to identify what your proposals might be?
Well, as we identify additional stakeholders, we would intend to include them in this constituent group that's reviewing the mitigation approach. We had our first meeting, and I think you heard from some of the people that attended that meeting that they're happy that their feedback is being incorporated into a revised strategy. So as we hear new concerns or new constituent groups identify themselves, we would intend to include them into that group so that we can make group decisions.
Is there anyone from the Parks and Recreation Commission as involved in that group?
Not currently, but we would welcome a participant.
So I think it makes sense to either include one of us in that group or have some regular updates of how things are progressing. Because as it stands now, I wasn't here last month, but to my knowledge, this commission has not yet heard what alternatives are being considered specifically. So there's rumor about, and we've heard that maybe there's a move to Arrastradero, or maybe there's this, or maybe there's that, but it's conjecture on our part at this point. So it would be nice to know a little more about what the strategies that are being considered are. Thanks.
Sure. Deirdre?
Yes, thank you for presenting to us tonight. So I have heard that in Arrastradero Preserve there's a good replenishment cycle so that the status quo of the trees are not in decline there. There's sort of a steady state. And as far as what you quoted about sort of the viability, I haven't heard numbers as high as 80 to 90% survival rate for this kind of project going into an open space preserve that's been a grasslands habitat. It's a well-established grasslands habitat now. It's not a woodlands habitat. So I'm a little bit curious about whether those numbers are a little bit optimistic, this 80 to 90% survival rate, assuming adequate watering, and also there's probably going to be some compromise of the environment just to get trucks in there to do planting. So I'm just wondering where you got those numbers of 80 to 90% survival.
Yeah, the projection on survival came from two partner groups that we're working with, Actera and Magic, and they've been planting trees in open space for 10 to 20 years.
And they're both nonprofits that are funded for that work through the city. And so I think those are stakeholders that have a vested interest in planting trees. And so I think it's really important to discern between the different kinds of stakeholders. And of all the stakeholders, I haven't heard a single stakeholder other than Canopy or Magic advocate any planting in Arrastradero Preserve. And so we're hearing a pretty big group of people saying they don't think that's the way to go. And I'm wondering what it's going to take to get that off the table and move toward closer into the Baylands, or else do some other alternatives.
Well, I think the focus that was derived from the constituent group is that we do want to prioritize the Baylands. On-site and near-site is our priority. Off-site in the foothills would be the fallback to try to bridge the gap between replacing those values in the Baylands and not having some of the value replaced. So, you know, the foothills would definitely be the lowest priority location, but I think as a default, that's, you know, certainly a viable location where historically there was more trees than what's there now, even though right now it's predominantly a grassland, as you stated. Historically, there was more wooded area there. The soils maps verify that, and our research on the history of those sites verify that there was additional canopy that is no longer present.
Can you comment on whether we need more grassland habitat or more woodland habitat for our local wildlife, birds, insects? What do we have the shortage of currently?
Yeah, I think it's dependent on the site. So if you simulate the natural history of an area, I think you typically have ecosystems that are able to thrive, where the further away we get from that natural history, the more that ecosystem has to struggle to adapt. So I would say that where we can duplicate the natural history, we're probably simulating the best approach, and that's going to result in the best habitat for wildlife. But I think your point in general is that we're probably lacking grasslands more than we are forest land.
Okay, thank you for commenting on that. And then as far as your list, you have listed first we go for on-site, near-site, additional near-site, and then lastly off-site, number 4. So I'm assuming that's Arostadero Preserve.
Correct.
And as far as 1, 2, and 3, where do the using shrubs and native plants fit in? Is that on number 1, 2, or 3? Because I think there's a lot of interest in that, because we have recently opened up more land in the Bixby Park, and we have some interest in the city to make that a beautiful place for people to walk and a vital habitat for wildlife.
Right. Yes, it actually fits into all 3 of those site locations. And in fact, if you recall the presentation on the golf course design, there's a lot of native grass and native woody shrubs that are going to be going in to naturalized areas between the holes. We're greatly reducing the footprint of playable area on the golf course, and significantly increasing the amount of naturalized area there. So that's occurring on the golf course, and we've already had discussions with both our constituents and staff members that agree that that can also occur at Bixby Park. That can also occur at some other locations to be considered. One that recently came up as a potential was the water quality control plant. There's land at the plant and surrounding the plant that could potentially be landscaped in a naturalized form so that we gain those values. So there's a lot of evaluation that has to occur to make sure that our mitigation approach is appropriate and that it results in the best values, but we are considering all those things that you mentioned.
Well, good. I'm glad that type of mitigation falls under 1, 2, and 3. That's great. And have you been working with Darren Anderson? Is he involved in this? Because I know Darren has learned a lot about how to do plantings in the Bixby Park, and he has an active CIP for that. So is Darren sort of pulled in on this? Okay, that's great. And then lastly, this is more toward Rob. As far as that plant, I think it's past Palom, or?
It's past Palom. Yeah.
Past Palom. Mm-hmm. When I heard the presentation on that at the PTC meeting on the golf course, the gentleman from Palo Alto cited a source in either North or South Carolina as an expert on this, and I'd like to encourage you to get more local information on it, because he was citing a source that's just so far away on the behavior, like the primary expert on the behavior of this grass, but it wasn't anyone in California. And I think it's really important to understand how that grass might work, especially because we have such a sensitive ecosystem around.
Yeah, I'll follow up with the commission on this particular topic. I know that there are at least 2 golf courses on the East Bay that have past Palom, as well as some on this side of the bay. So
yeah, and so it'd be best if it's someone who kind of understood this ecosystem. Thanks.
Okay. Just a question, when we're doing this mitigation relative to the golf course, remind me, is that part of the overall budget for the golf course? Or is this incremental from some other source?
The budget does include tree planting on the golf course.
Does not?
It does.
Okay.
Include tree planting on the golf course, and the addition of 50 acres of native natural areas to the golf course. That's part of the golf course budget.
Right.
If we do mitigation near site or off site, that is not yet included.
And what are the likely sources of funding for that?
Well, that's a good question. I think we would roll that into the revenue bond that we build, that we put out for the golf course reconstruction. And maybe part of it will come from the JPA for their portion of impact to the trees. Mm-hmm. But mostly I would say it would be the revenue bond to pay for the golf course construction.
Okay. Oh, yes, go ahead, Keith.
What's the time frame for this? There's a lot to do. There's planning. You have to select the sites, you have to select what's going to be planted there and then finally get it planted. Are we starting the process now, or are we waiting till the golf course is under construction?
Walter might want to add to this, but we're in the planning phase right now, and as you can hear, it's not yet done, and but it's coming together, and we're getting some really good and valuable feedback, and it's changing the plan. The EIR goes to the council by December is the plan, and at that time, we hope that we'll have a fairly fleshed out tree mitigation plan that we can share at the same time. The golf course construction truly gets underway, if all goes well, in April of 2014. And we would want to start the tree mitigation plan as early as possible.
So do you have a guess of when you'd be starting to plant? This is for the off-site trees. That would be a year from now? Is that?
For all the trees, our soonest time to start putting in the ground, start planting, would be probably November of 2014. Because we've kind of missed this planting season because we still have a lot of planning to do, and so it'd just be way too optimistic to think that we're going to plant trees, this November through March of 2014.
And you usually start just for the rainy season, or can you plant anytime during the year?
Right. We try to establish trees where they're going to receive their initial watering from natural rainfall.
Okay. And how long do you have to water them if you have supplemental watering?
Depending on what size we establish, anywhere from 1 year to 3 years.
Did you have a follow-up?
I just wanted to, are we going to discuss this among ourselves, or can I just make a general comment right now to the commission?
It's on the agenda.
I really appreciate Commissioner Hederley's comment of sort of keeping our commission involved, because I think that we're sort of under our purview to look at these kinds of park impacts with these kinds of mitigations. And so I'm hoping this will come back to our commission as an action item at some point, so that we'll get to actually make a recommendation on this. And so I don't know when the proper time to bring that up is, but I just sort of want to put that out there, that we're going to, maybe we'll have a commissioner sit in on the stakeholders meetings. We've done that with the Bixby Park projects, and it's been very useful to do that, because when you go to the stakeholder meetings, you just learn so much information that way. And so I really do think this would be appropriate for us to make some kind of recommendation at some point. And it would be at the point when there's alternatives sort of on the table, in a more evolved way than right now.
Okay, thanks. Why don't we monitor that? And we also have to decide relative to, if and which commissioner should be part of that. So that's another action item we need. Councilor Schmidt?
Just a quick follow-up on timing. A number of people have mentioned Bixby Park as a site. Right now there is soil conditioning, coverage, contouring taking place, which will end this fall. Is there any need for a timing decision on tree replacement in that area before they finish the soil work they're doing?
I think our timing is fairly nicely aligned with what they're doing at Bixby right now, and I have had discussions with staff that are coordinating that project, and they really like the concept that's been developed thus far, and they're eager to be involved.
Okay, great. Thanks for the input. Glad to see so many groups involved, and let's expand it. That's good. So the next item on the agenda is a recommendation on feeding wildlife and feral animals. That's actually an ordinance being presented by Darren Anderson.
All right. Good evening. Darren Anderson, Division Manager for Open Space Parks and Golf. And I'm here tonight to ask the Commission to recommend the Council that amend the Palo Alto Municipal Code 2204-270, adding subsection C, which would prohibit feeding of wildlife and feral animals in Palo Alto's parks and open space areas. I presented this topic to the Commission on May 28, 2013, and I'll give you just a brief snapshot of what that presentation entitled. And essentially it was an argument that feeding wildlife is not in the best interest of the animals, nor is it in the best interest of our park visitors. I provided numerous examples of how and why it's harmful, how it negatively affects park amenities and the visitor experience in general, and how feeding is inconsistent with our policies and procedures. For example, our division statement for open space parks and golf is to protect and interpret resources and wildlife entrusted to Palo Alto for the enjoyment of future generations. The key part in there is to protect our wildlife. And when we're allowing feeding of wildlife, which is generally accepted by all the scientific communities and the park management professionals in the United States as harmful, we're in contradiction there. And this is an opportunity to correct that. Another one where we're conflicting with our actions would be looking at the golf course, where we spend $20,000 a year for a herding dog to move geese off that course because of the damage they cause. We spend hundreds of hours a year with our ranger staff and volunteers to locate resident Canada geese nests and addle their eggs to control those numbers because they're growing out of control with no natural predators. But at the same time, we're allowing feeding. So with one hand, we're luring them in, and the other hand, we're saying you can't be here. And that's an inconsistency, and we can correct it. In general, feeding wildlife is an outdated and harmful way for our park visitors to interact with wildlife. And there's other better ways of doing that. Bird watching, observation, painting, art, lots of different programs they can participate in, going to the Junior Museum and interacting with wildlife, but feeding is not the way. Now, the Commission generally supported the concept that I presented on May 28th and suggested I reach out to the Audubon Society to ensure that the proposed ordinance fully addressed the issue. And so I did that. I met with Shawnee Kleinhaus from the local Audubon Society, and we amended the staff report and ordinance to include prohibiting feral animals. In the discussions with Shawnee, we talked a great deal about the impacts of feral cats. And I have a lot of personal experience with this as well. But in general, as you probably read in the staff report, the feral cat population poses a significant threat to our local bird population and other associated wildlife. There are also human health threats from the feral cats due to a parasite that's common in them called toxoplasmosis. This isn't just website data collected and referencing Colorado or Texas. This is 12 years of personal experience from someone who has personally removed hundreds of bowls of cat food left in our nature preserves. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen the rats, I've smelled the skunks, I've seen the footprints from the raccoons. So I know for a fact there are pest predators that are lured in by those feeding stations. And I've also seen cats, again, I'm talking about 12 years of watching the impact of these. I've seen feral cats with birds in their mouths. So I find it disingenuous when I hear a counter-argument saying, well, they're being fed, so there's no negative impact on the wildlife. I know for a fact that's not true. Now, maybe we could argue the severity of the impact, but whether they're having an impact on the wildlife or not is, I don't think it's a matter of doubt on that one. I also need to point out that when those cat feeding stations are present, you're luring in other pest animals, those rats, those skunks, those opossums, and they also prey on those either bird eggs and nests in the marshland areas. And then lastly, I need to point out that these cats are exotic species, right? These are not native species. So I've heard the counter argument of, well, if your intent is to protect the avian population from every predator, then you're going to have to kill everything that would eat them. And that's not the argument, nor the intent of this in any way, nor are we doing that. We're taking an exotic species that is not part of the normal and healthy predator-prey relationship that currently exists, where you have native predators feeding on native prey. But this is an exotic species that, again, they never co-evolved. So these species, like the rabbits and the mice and the birds, aren't designed to evolve in balance with them. And the end result is basically no biodiversity, and you don't have the ecological balance. And so that's one of the aims of banning feeding of the feral animals. Now, we appreciate the catch, neuter, and release movement. I think there's a lot of legitimacy to that in some ways. I'm just arguing that we control where we feed the cats. A third of Palo Alto is parkland. That's open space and urban parks. And this doesn't preclude feeding of cats throughout the entire city, only in the parks and open space. And if we look again at that mission statement, where we say protecting wildlife is our mission. And if we look at the city's comprehensive plan, again, protecting wildlife is what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to manage our natural resources. So if that's truly what we're saying in our policies and procedures and our actions, then this needs to align with that too. And that's both feeding wildlife and feral animals. And truly, I think that's where we're headed with this ordinance, is protecting the wildlife. I should note that we received a letter of support from the Sierra Club, the Committee to Complete the Refuge, and Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, all supporting the ordinance. And I'm available for any questions you have.
Okay, I think before that, we'll take public comment. You think it's operative? Rob, could you check that microphone there? With some fiddling by the vice chair, we might have that operative.
Testing, testing.
Keep fiddling. Yeah, that other mic is on right next to Darren. So, the first speaker card is it Renee Flexer? Did I say that correctly? And just again, a reminder: we have a lot of speakers, so please be efficient with your time and no more than 3 minutes.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear.
Okay. My name is Ren, and I'm a cat trapper, and I wish my friend from Rescue Group could have been here tonight if we had known the issue was going to be debated tonight, but we only heard it last night. We agree that birds at the duck pond should not be fed by people, and in general, that feeding with wildlife is not advantageous to wildlife. The issue of feral cats at the Bayland is a tough one. It's not obvious how best to protect the birds. We want to protect the birds, but removing feeding of the feral cats may push the cats further into the Bayland, making them harder to trap if this is your goal. What is the advice of animal services, which I assume you would be relying on? I don't know. Foster City and the Homeless Cat Network had handled the problem very differently. Last but not least, we have seen that in an Appendix B, section number 4, you were thinking of making a broad ban to the city, the Palo Alto. And I am not aware of any cat colonies in the other Palo Alto parks within the city limit. Municipal parks are not sanctuaries, and there is no real reason why to prohibit feeding in a proper manner. More important, the issue of broad regulation on the whole city is not appropriate. The city has been kept clean by the hard work of Palo Alto Animal Services and by many other community volunteers who have removed kittens, sterilized adult cats. They manage those colonies. Managing is a key, not a general ban on feeding. There is no reason to prohibit this feeding. I personally have been involved with trap, neuter, and release, and I have monitored some volunteer feeders, and I can attest that we have seen colonies which started with about 12 cats, or in another circumstance, about 20 cats, and over the years, they have dwindled to almost nothing. So trap, neuter, and release works if it's accompanied with proper management of colony with proper clean feeding. So I urge you not to put any general ban citywide, and also to contact with the appropriate organization who deal with cats. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. The next speaker is Scotty Zimmerman.
Hello, I'm Scotty Zimmerman. I am a member of the board of directors of a brand new nonprofit organization, Friends of the Palo Alto Animal Shelter. I've volunteered at the animal shelter for years. Some of my good friends are people who do trap, neuter, release of cats. At the shelter, I'm sort of going to ramble here. At the shelter, we have what we call kitten season, which is because cats have not been spayed and neutered, and the population has been diminishing noticeably from the perspective of volunteers in the cat room at the shelter. So the whole program is effective. I cannot speak for countywide. Santa Clara County is a big place. And so I am completely in favor of continuing this very kind and generous hard work these people do to catch the cats that need to be spayed and neutered and put them back. A lot of people actually do try to socialize and make them adoptable cats and kittens, and that works too. They aren't automatically 100% hopelessly feral. That does happen. There are differences. We're all in favor of the wildlife. I love the idea of the salt marsh harvest mouse, which I've never seen, but I know he's there somewhere. But I think it's working. It's a very good program. Most of the people I know are so responsible. I understand that apparently there have been some bad examples of messy feeding stations and so on out on the marshlands. Nobody here is in favor of that, I'm sure. But it's a really good program. It's kind to cats. It helps to diminish the number of cats who will be out there doing any harm to birds or mice. Thank you.
Thanks very much. The next speaker is Christina Peck.
Good evening. I'm talking this evening about the proposed ordinance prohibiting the feeding of wildlife in city parks and open space, and specifically the subsection regarding feral cats. I'm disappointed and shocked that the Commission would blindly and in private discussions follow the advice of the Audubon Society and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regarding feral cats. I am in favor of the ban prohibiting feeding of wildlife, but feral cats are not wildlife. The addition to prohibit the feeding of feral cats is an issue that was obviously brought up by the Audubon Society. The Commission must be aware that the Society has an agenda, and the agenda is to eradicate feral cats. The staff report by Mr. Anderson, is rife with inaccuracies about feral cats. It cites a study by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Smithsonian about the number of birds killed by feral cats and other damage they cause. However, the significance of this so-called study has been discredited by statisticians. One of the bird researchers herself was convicted of attempting to poison cats in her Washington, D.C. neighborhood. She was defended by the same attorney who defended Michael Vick, the NFL quarterback. The Commission conducted private discussions with both the Audubon Society and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but did not seek input from any animal welfare organization in proposing this ordinance. I urge the Commission to remove the terms feral animal and feral cat from the proposed section 22.04.270C. If the Commission has concerns about cats or feral cats, I urge them to consult a local animal welfare organization to resolve any problems and focus on the issue at hand, prohibiting the feeding of wildlife. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Eileen McLaughlin.
Hello again, it's Eileen McLaughlin with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. And I want to thank you for taking this under consideration. I'm very appreciative of the report and the studies that have been done by staff in preparation for considering this ordinance. I can't officially speak for the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge, the neighbor to the Bay Lines to the northwest and the southeast, but I can sit here and say I strongly encourage and recommend that you support this ordinance moving forward as proposed. It will serve the hundreds of species that are on the National Wildlife Refuge, quite a number of whom are ground-dwelling and endangered species, and they will all benefit from this ordinance. There's a fact in the background which I might improve, was that the National Wildlife Refuges are also an agency that does not allow feeding of wildlife and feral animals, nor does it allow actually TNR, release of cats, for the very same reason that they can go in and take a brood of those endangered mice, and very easily because they're all on the ground, as well as eggs and others. I'd like to kind of use some examples from my own life to make us think about cats. When I was a young person, we were at home, and we let our cat wander outside, but she had a loving home, she was well fed, and she would go out and we'd open our door maybe and find it was a rat or a mouse sitting on her front porch. She'd brought it home to show off what her expertise at hunting and give it to us. Later, as a very young woman, I had a cat which I treated the same, allowed her to go outside. She was well fed and loved. And her preference was birds. And she got around to where she would bring home baby birds, raiding nests, bring them home alive as toys. One day I saw her outside, and she had this little tiny bird following behind it. She'd been so gentle in bringing it home as her toy. Cats do what they do, and I hope some of you, I would guess some of you have experience with cats that they are hunters. Doesn't matter how well they're fed, they chase things, they catch things. It's just their nature, and they are just doing what cats do. So I would just like to conclude with the fact that generations change. My mother, when she would babysit my kids when they were little, her favorite place was to come to the Baylands to feed the ducks. And now I take them out and we go find how many different ducks can we find, and can we mark them in your own little personal field guide, and they take that home. We move on. It's time to move on with this ordinance. It's the right ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Linda Ruthroff. With two more after that.
So I'm wearing two hats tonight. I am the Conservation Chair of the Native Plant Society, but I'm also on the committee at Audubon for Environmental Action. Shani Kleinhaus had two very important meetings tonight. Since I was conversant with this one, you get me in her place. So I want to establish right from the start that I'm an animal lover. I understand the motivation for the catch and the release. It's trying to save lives. It's trying to have the cats not pay the price for people being bad stewards and allowing them to run off or dropping them off out in the wild and really not maintaining their responsibility. The catch and neuter and release. The catch and neuter is wonderful. It's the release that's the problem. You're releasing a predator out into an environment that is not adapted to that predator. So in the end, the killing and the dying doesn't stop. It's just that the cats aren't being killed and the cats aren't dying, but it's being pushed off onto other species. So instead you have birds dying, and you have lizards and small mammals and endangered species dying. So it's a workable solution only if you're looking at cats. But if you're looking at the big picture, when you release these predators in the wild, you're allowing death and killing. And it's not a good solution. If we're trying to be kind, we need to be kind to all of the creatures, and we need to find another solution to the feral cat problem, and a solution that doesn't push off the destruction onto the environment and the animals that live in the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Lenore Delgado.
Okay. Thank you to the Parks and Recreation Commission for opening item 3 to public discussion. My name is Leonor Delgado, and I'm the Humane Educator for Palo Alto Humane Society. I'm speaking tonight in lieu of our Executive Director, Carol Hyde, who apologizes for being unable to attend tonight's meeting. Palo Alto Humane Society, or PAWS, has been recognized and widely respected on the peninsula and beyond for its 104-year history as a responsible civic organization that has always been concerned for the welfare of all local animals. As such, we question the Commission's outreach to only one animal welfare organization, the local branch of the Audubon Society, in the preparation of its recommendations to modify the existing ordinance in question. We believe that the Commission would have been more amply served by calling upon other local responsible animal welfare groups to contribute to its proposal. And we respectfully request that the Commission include other groups in its discussion and finalization of its proposal before that proposal is presented for a vote at the City Council. PAWS wholly agrees with the Commission's finding that visitors' feeding of birds and other wildlife at the Baylands Duck Pond and other open spaces reserved for endangered species is harmful to all the animals. However, we ask you to revisit carefully any other proposed provisions calling for, and I quote from Attachment B comments, quote, the possibility of adding language to broaden the ordinance to include other areas in the city. Staff will investigate by having conversations with the Audubon Society and Fish and Wildlife and see if they feel it would be necessary, specifically in reference to feral cats. Reiterating, PAWS believes that pursuit of the suggestion in this comment needs to be addressed in an open discussion that includes recognized and responsible local animal welfare groups. The Executive Director and I are offering that PAWS take part in that discussion, and we request that you modify the comment to reflect the participation of other animal welfare groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The last speaker on this topic is Emily Renzel.
Well, thank you for listening to me again. Chairman Lowing and members of the Parks and Recreation Commission, it's a difficult subject that you're having to deal with, but it's an important one, and particularly in our natural areas. On behalf of the Baylands Conservation Committee, I urge you to support the staff recommendation to restrict wildlife feeding and feral animal feeding in natural areas. And I confess to be one of those people who took little nieces and nephews to feed the ducks many times, and it was very enjoyable. But as other people have mentioned, it's time to recognize that we know a lot more about that now and shouldn't be doing it. Our comprehensive plan has many goals, policies, and programs to protect natural habitats for wildlife and for humans to enjoy. Part of protecting natural habitats is allowing for adequate food and cover for native species. It's counterproductive for humans to interrupt that natural balance by feeding other animals in these open space natural areas. It's particularly disruptive to feed non-native species and feral animals, which prey upon the native species, some of them endangered. I personally have witnessed at least one animal feeding station in the San Antonio Road area in the back of an industrial park. And, literally, if a human being walks into this little area, these cats just come out of anywhere. So it's really, that there's going to be an impact on the nearby wildlife. So I urge you to support the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the speakers on this topic. I'm looking to see if that's correct. I think it is. Okay, thanks. So we'll now have a question on the Parks Commission. Does someone want to start off? Exhausted already. Commissioner Ashland.
I'll start off. I was surprised to see the $20,000 fee for dogs to herd geese off the golf course, and think that we should throw it out there to consider the many dog owners that are looking for places to run their dogs, and they wouldn't charge us $20,000. So throw that out there. And I'm going to stop there for now.
Yeah, Commissioner Hatterley.
I have a question for Darren. In the staff report, you mentioned that the vast majority of cities, counties, state, and federal parks do not ban feeding of wildlife, and you later cite some local communities that also do not ban feeding of wildlife. Is that correct?
I think I might have used the double negative. What that should have said is there are numerous agencies that have no feeding, as in quotes. So they have rules that prohibit feeding, was what was intended. Forgive me for that.
It's page 4.
Grammatical error.
If you're tracking the bottom of page 4.
That was my question.
I'm happy to go, but yielding. Go ahead.
With respect to the duck pond, what would be the natural population in the duck pond? I mean, right now it's just very full of ducks and other wildlife. If you stop feeding them, would there still be ducks there, or would the ducks be elsewhere in the baylands? Are they only at the duck pond because of the feeding?
It would be a smaller population. There would still be ducks there. There'd still be, for example, there are snowy egrets and black-crowned night herons that nest on the adjacent palm trees in that bird sanctuary area adjacent to the pond. They feed on some small fish in that pond, and that's where they congregate. There are some ducks that, when injured, sometimes that's a place where they often congregate. And intermittently, just species will come in. So I would expect, though I couldn't verify, that you'd see the population probably go in half, would be my rough guess. And what you'd really get, what the primary difference would be, is they'd still be there, but they'd be spread out, just like you'd see in naturalized areas. I mean, occasionally they'd flock together, of course, but when you throw down a piece of bread and 50 ducks all climb into the same square inch chasing it, that's the abnormal part, right? Anywhere in nature, you don't quite get that feeding frenzy because they all have special niches that they fill, and when they feed in natural areas, vast mud flats or tidal areas like that.
The duck pond, is that freshwater?
No, it's a mix of reclaimed and then some salt water that kind of comes up.
Oh, the city fills the duck pond?
We do.
Okay.
Although it's a little more complex. At one point when we were not adding reclaimed water, and we tried to drain it for some maintenance purposes, and it couldn't be drained. We had a pump running nonstop for 6 hours, so it's certainly getting saltwater intrusion from underneath.
Okay.
Okay, I'll take the floor here for a minute. A few questions. One is, actually, I want to make a statement first. We got a lot of letters from constituents, and we love that, and the speakers as well, because that just gives a lot more feedback. And a lot of the letters are very creative too, so they were interesting reading. Just a few questions. I guess I'll stay with the duck pond first, and I'm not recommending this. I'm asking a question about it because what I'm about to ask I know is completely contrary to what we're trying to do. But there's a number of issues here. One is, there is a special place for the duck pond in Palo Alto people's hearts, back to grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on. Another separate issue potentially is the feral cats issue, which I guess came up subsequent to the last meeting. And then there's the wildlife issue in the parks. And I emphasize again, in the parks, because some of the public comment, I think, made it sound like it was everywhere in town, which it's not. The issues are around protecting open space so that, there's the wildlife is protected there. But in the duck pond, what would be, I'll call it the downside of just throwing caution to the wind and saying, we're going to do this everywhere except the duck pond because that's so special. And obviously you'd have to mitigate that in some other way. So I'm not suggesting that or recommending it. I'm just saying what would be the possibilities there of just sort of put a barrier around it and call it something else.
I'm fortunate in having, like I mentioned, 12 years of experience at that site where I pass it every single day. I personally have removed no less than 100 dead ducks, some riddled with disease, pock marks covered the entire head. So I'm really privy, and I used to walk around because it was every day. I'd see people standing in front of signs saying, please don't feed, here's what can happen. Doling out boxes of Cheerios, huge cartons of donuts, and not getting the concept that you are directly having a negative impact on this wildlife. You can see them congregate. You can see the injuries happen. I mean, I took out so many birds with broken wings. I found one with a wooden skewer through its wing. It's a black-crowned night heron with a wooden skewer through its arm. I don't know exactly how that happened, but I got to imagine it was while fighting with all these other species.
So the population and the aggression is basically...
It's the disease. It's the effect on the amenities. It's the most uninviting little area I can possibly imagine because it's continually covered with guano. Every bench is completely covered. It has to be pressure washed 3 times a year, and that's not nearly enough. So I think the argument I would make on why not to exclude the duck pond from that whole thing is, if anywhere, that's where it's at its highest concentration, where it has the biggest impacts. They're all fighting and eating off ground that's covered in guano, picking up diseases and sharing it amongst each other.
I raise it just because I think it's going to be the core question of constituents, and I'm sure council is going to want that understanding to pass on to constituents as well, and the press and so on.
And if you could indulge me, I'd love to share, at the previous commission meeting, I had shared 3 analogous situations, historic precedents where there was a much beloved, much longer than our duck pond precedent of feeding, of kind of park, I don't know how to describe it, but something beloved. And let's look at 2 of them, both at Yosemite National Park. There's something called the Fire Falls, where they used to build this massive bonfire, and the people down in Curry Village would scream up, let the fire fall. And they'd push all the embers from this massive fire down off the peaks of whatever mountain it was, and you could watch it and it looked like fire falling. And that went on for something like 87 years. Beloved. And it finally went away when the park district said, this is not in the best interest of the habitat. It's an artificial form of recreation that really belongs in something like Disneyland, not in a national park. Also at Yosemite, it was once standard practice where they would feed the bears for the entertainment of the visitors. It was beloved. There's tons of photos in National Geographic of people hanging out their back doors and watching the bears feed off the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches you would throw out or off the refuse. Until eventually it became known that the impact on these bears is really harmful, and you have got to put them down. And then, of course, they have the negative impact on park visitors, breaking into cars, associating people with food. And really quickly it became knowledgeable and understood amongst the scientific community and the park managers that this is harmful, and it was discontinued. And people don't miss it because we're still dealing with repercussions from that. If you go to Yosemite right now, you don't dare go backpacking without a bear canister. If you go camping, you've got to put it in locked canisters because of the repercussions of what had happened so long ago. So there are two good examples of these historic precedents, something beloved that went away. You'd still get 1 million visitors a year to Yosemite. People love it. And I think the same will be true of all our Palo Alto parks.
Okay. Another question, would the discussion be enhanced by comments from Humane Society, animal welfare groups? Would we learn anything that we haven't heard already?
I don't know the answer to that. I know the opinion of other municipalities and county organizations that have brought about codes to stop this, and they share the reasons, and they shared all the research that said this is harmful. I know from the wildlife biologists at Fish and Wildlife Service and Fish and Game, and I know from speaking with the Audubon Society that they're all of the same opinion that this is not in the interest of wildlife. And if that's truly our mission and our goal, as I've stated in the comp plan, in the Baylands master plan, in our mission statement to protect wildlife, then we're not doing it and it should be banned. Now, I recognize the fact that there are contrary opinions, and maybe they've got some alternative, but in my mind, I can't imagine anything that would change. I just know for a fact that cats have a negative impact on wildlife in naturalized areas because I've seen it. And maybe there's a debate to be had on the severity of the impact, and maybe an alternative voice would be helpful for the commission, but I leave that to you.
Okay. And my last question is, what is the reality of enforcement of this? Because you need to enforce it or it's toothless, but we want to be somewhat gentle about that to the grandmas with their kids and their grandkids.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. We've got a lot of compliance. I've been doing pushing the message of please do not feed for 7 years. So a lot of people will say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. I'm really glad to know that I'm harming these animals instead of helping them. Because most of the people feeding want to do a positive. They want to help these animals and engage. And some of them are there just for recreation because they enjoy seeing the animal close and it's fun for them or the kids. But once I tell them about how harmful it is, most understand and stop. But you have the select few who don't care. They either enjoy the recreation or they don't believe in it. And those are the ones that need a stronger encouragement via municipal code. So more directly to your question, how it will be enforced, park rangers at areas where it's most prevalent, Duck Pond, Pearson Rastradero, sporadically where people are potentially feeding coyotes, which has been mentioned in the staff report, something that's been witnessed. Those people will be cited if they continue to do it after being warned. So park rangers will be predominantly the ones doing that. In our urban parks, it'll probably not be enforced that much. And frankly, it doesn't happen that much. It's periodic, it's small. People are feeding pigeons and ground squirrels and tree squirrels, that kind of thing. But it's led to some serious problems. If you go to, I've been to 3 or 4 parks where I experienced directly squirrels that would not back up no matter how aggressive I was with them trying to shoo them away from my food. And I thought, I'm 6'4", and I'm stomping the ground and I'm yelling, I can't get him to budge. So what's a little kid going to do with a banana in his hand or a granola bar? He's going to get bitten or he's going to get taken. And I don't want that to happen.
Right. So I think the answer is that there are going to be citations.
Well, in some cases, it just needs to be education. So I can put up a really good sign in those areas, and that's going to take care of a lot of it. It's going to be spreading the word through my park maintenance staff when they see it to go spread that educational endeavor because they can't issue citations, and they're at those urban parks. It's for the ones that say, hey, you know what? I've seen the same guy every day. I've talked to him, and he won't stop feeding. That's the guy who's going to get the ticket.
Mm-hmm. Okay. As they say, no further questions. Yeah, Commissioner Markovich.
Do you know the number of feral cats that are in the Baylands?
I don't.
You don't? My other comment was regarding education of not feeding the wildlife. You have a great opportunity through the environmental volunteers when all of those grade school kids come through every year to pick weeds and pick up garbage. Send them home with a flyer.
Yeah.
You're going to hit hundreds and hundreds of families. and hopefully that'll help.
It's a great suggestion.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about we had discussed in previous meetings about people dumping bread and other items at the location. If we're looking into a webcam or any thing like that to do enforcement when food is being dumped after hours.
Is the question, have we looked into a webcam for that?
Yeah.
No, we haven't. The need to, having staff to monitor it, frankly, would just not be practical. Our ranger staff is so small, and they're usually out in the field. But the advantage where that happens most frequently is at the duck pond, which is 100 yards from the ranger station. So it's passed so frequently that they're often, if any spot, that's going to be the easiest one to get compliance and stop that kind of behavior.
Okay. Another question is regarding the sign that's shown here in attachment C. It talks about you're killing us with your kindness and how to help, but I don't see any mention on this signage regarding what the fine would be.
Yeah, thank you. That one's just an interpretive sign that we had made several years ago.
Okay.
And so it's more of an indication of the type of interpretive sign. We probably have a combination of those kinds that's kind of the friendly, hey, look what we're doing, and some more of the regulatory ones. Some hybrid. This one specialized, you see a lot of ducks because it was for the duck pond. I think we'd be looking at altering it to be, I want a squirrel on there. I want people to see the visual of all the different kind of species that we don't want them to feed. So it might be site-specific signs in some areas too. It's more of an example.
Okay, and my final comment is just that although it might not be an easy answer, I think it might be worth it to look into consulting with the animal welfare organizations to see if we can monitor reducing the population of the feral cats or moving them. Maybe there is some sort of compromise there to make progress without a direct stop of the feeding of the feral cats, although the feeding of the wildlife, the ducks and so forth, I think was unanimously approved. I mean, not approved. No complaints about that.
Can I ask a clarifying question? You said look into speaking with animal groups about moving cats. You mean moving them out of park settings and into just outside adjacent areas?
Yeah, I'm not an expert by any means on the animal welfare of feral cats. But I did think that the Audubon Society gave good information regarding the birds and the lizards and the mice. But taking these animal welfare groups that have offered their support, just to see what they have to say and see if there is some compromise that we could look into. Like I said, either reducing the population, or I don't have any idea if that's possible to move a feral cat population, but that there might be some value there in speaking with them.
Commissioner Hatterley, you ready?
Yeah, I have a question and some final comments. Darren, I just want to confirm that the cat trap and release efforts, they're not exclusively limited to the parks and open space areas. Those happen all over the city, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay. Then if there aren't any other questions, I have a general comment. Do you have questions?
I just wanted to thank you for the thoroughness of your report. I know that what I view down at the duck pond is an extreme overuse of feeding. So some of us have this very lovely image of just a few crumbs being thrown, but I've never seen that. At the duck pond, I've seen huge numbers of loaves of bread being dumped, not a delicate distributing of the food. And I even saw bacon being dumped there. And so I think I don't know why that's happening there, maybe because it is an urban setting. People are close to coming from their homes and their supermarkets, but I really think it's quite a problem there. And I'm looking forward to just opening up some discussion as far as the feral cats go, because I think that the groups that you've consulted, Darren, are the groups that are concerned about wildlife, and you've done a thorough job with that. And I really understand the passion that people feel for cats. I just took in a stray cat myself a month ago, having never owned a cat before, but my children rescued it from the yard, and we're now caring for it. So I think it was potentially on its way to becoming a feral cat, and I feel good about helping out this lovely animal. and I see the rewards of it. But I think that the groups that are taking care of cats and dogs have a different focus altogether, and their mandate is actually not covered in our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan, our natural environment element covers the respect and management of natural resources in a way that sustains the natural environment and protects all of our parks and open space. It's not just open space. Our natural environment protects natural areas. And so often our natural areas are at risk of development. And so we have this stated in our comprehensive plan because it's so hard to create this kind of protection. We're going against the grain of development, and these lands are worth a lot of money. And that's why we have to have these kinds of documents that protect them. And it's a completely different mandate than the Humane Society or other organizations that help with domesticated animals. And I can't say enough to support those organizations because they do amazing work. But it's a different mandate. And I think that they're at odds with one another. The feral cats, we don't have the Humane Societies releasing any other animals. And I do know that their program, they put a lot of work into that catch and release, or it's also called sometimes trap, neuter, and return. And I think what happens with those programs is that they do reduce the numbers of animals because the neutering does diminish the reproduction of those cats. So the feral cats are coming from domesticated cats. And so it's hard. We need to work at stemming the tide there through educational programs. That's where we got our stray cat. It came from a domesticated cat, and our stray had not yet gone feral because we got it in time. But the feral cats also reproduce to produce more feral cats, and I think the good work of these organizations, the admirable, passionate work of these organizations is stemming the tide of feral cats reproducing to produce more feral cats. But as some of our speakers said, once those cats are out in the environment, they are killing animals. They're at odds with our mandate to protect natural resources. And so while our commission works very hard to be as inclusive as possible, bringing in more groups, I just think that personally that the missions are not the same. And maybe we can open that up for discussion right now.
From my perspective, the evidence is clear that feeding wildlife is bad for wildlife and bad for people. I appreciate the passion and the dedication of those who are seeking to preserve the ability to feed the feral cats, especially as a means to facilitate effective trap and release efforts. And I thank you for turning out tonight to educate us about the perspective of the animal welfare community. I'm not convinced, however, that further outreach would reveal significant arguments on either side of the issue that haven't been heard tonight. As custodians of the parks and open space in Palo Alto, I believe that the preservation of the natural ecosystem is a critical priority, and I plan to support the ordinance tonight.
I would concur with what the other commissioners have said with regard to supporting this ordinance. I think that we have to think about the best interest of the habitat and the natural ecosystem when looking at the situation, and that has to be our first priority. And if that's in jeopardy, that we have a moral obligation to protect those natural resources that we've been blessed in Palo Alto to have. I do agree that having further discussion with other groups, even though there's been a lot of evidence and support given to us thus far, really wouldn't provide any other data points than what we've already heard. And I do support this ordinance as well.
Okay, if we're into the discussion on the ordinance, we better have a motion, one way or the other. If you wanted to put that into a motion so we could have discussion about that.
Sure. I'll move that we adopt the amended ordinance, or the ordinance.
And then there'll be further discussion.
I'll second that motion.
Okay.
Can I ask a question of
Yep,
clarification?
but we have a motion and a second to approve the ordinance as is. Now ask the question.
Oh, no, I apologize.
Okay. So we'll continue discussion
Excuse me,
then
Chair
on the
Lyon?
motion. Yeah.
I was just wondering if I could make a quick comment.
Sure.
If the commission was wanted to direct staff, I'd be glad to do a little of that outreach that was proposed of whether the ordinance passes or not, to reach out to those communities to look into those options for, is there a way staff can somehow help or facilitate and encourage those cats to move out of the areas where we're going to be banning feeding.
Okay, great. So comments relative to the motion then?
Can I ask a quick question pertaining to that really quickly? I'm so sorry. Move them where?
That's an excellent
Because if you
question.
move them to another open space, I mean, I can't say that I'm an expert in feral cats, but they're not, from my understanding, they wouldn't be able to be domesticated once they've crossed that line. So where could you possibly move them?
Well, that's what those resources are going to tell you, right?
Right. I also, in general, not in favor of moving, this is not analogous, but a pest species. Like, for example, sometimes people will catch ground squirrels, and it's illegal to transport them to areas. That's not the same with cats, of course, but I'm just saying in general, I don't move one problem to a different area. I'm just saying I'd be glad to reach out to that community and find out more and see if there's a way staff can help, if there is a legitimate and reasonable way to do so.
And I'll just comment, maybe you can, since you're doing educational programs through youth for animal feeding, I wonder if we can teach youth that the process of a domesticated cat becoming feral and how hard that is on the cat, and just to raise awareness about animal stewardship, domesticated animal stewardship among our youth as we teach them about stewardship of wildlife, because many kids are really interested in domesticated animals, and it's just it's an opportunity to help with this, I think.
Commissioner Bechtel?
One of my concerns is that outside of parks even, we have a lot of raccoons, we have a lot of skunks, a lot of rats that feed on feeding stations. And I don't think the ordinance goes far enough. I think that we should, instead of be banning in parks and open space, it should be all public lands. I think primarily right now it is in parks, but if it's outlawed in parks, it'll be going to utility lands, it'll be going to boulevards, it'll be going to other places that are owned by the city right now.
Any other comments on the ordinance and the motion?
May staff respond to Commissioner Reckendall's comment?
Sure.
We had looked at that as well as staff internally kind of debated how we would best do this. That was one of the considerations early on, and as a kind of a logical starting spot, we thought, let's just see, one of the questions was how you can enforce this. Well, now you're tripling the size of our scope, right? If we're looking at just parks and open space, you're looking at 2/3 more if you went all the public lands for Palo Alto. And so my recommendation would be to start with parks and open space and do a long period of time to see how we can sustain that. Can we enforce it? Can we make it work? What are the impacts? We could also look at the impacts to those cats. Under the current system, that would still leave plenty of areas for feeding and maybe a time period where you could, I heard them say they're having success at reducing the populations. If that's true, well then leaving the rest of the city as areas where you could still potentially do that kind of thing would give them time to reduce those even greater. Just a consideration.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to add is I have heard that there are cat ranches, and so it's really hard to have the feral cats coexisting anywhere in urban and wildlife settings. And actually one of the arguments to have the feeding stations is to say, well, keep them out of the urban centers by kind of feeding them over here. And then if you let them get to urban centers, it becomes a public health problem. So what I've heard as a mitigation for this is to actually find a home, not a family home, but a large, I guess for lack of a better word, it's somewhat of an institutional setting, but a humane institutional setting for these cats. I just wanted to throw that out to our commission because that is something that within this literature, it's talked about.
Okay. If there are no other questions, then we have a motion on the floor to approve the ordinance as it's been submitted by staff, and it has been seconded and it's been discussed, and we've heard public comment. So, all in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your hand. Aye. All right, so we have 3, 4, 5, 6, and opposed? 1, 6, 1, motion passes. Thank you, Darren. Thank you for the public comment.
Could I just ask, because as we go to council with this, we want to be sure that we capture the no vote and the sort of reason. If I could ask Commissioner Ashland just to talk a little bit about that.
I believe if the comprehensive plan doesn't say that we should treat animals humanely, then that is a failing of the comprehensive plan. And by not consulting an animal welfare organization in Palo Alto that's offered their help, we're turning a blind eye to useful information that could potentially, I believe, from what they're saying, provide useful information to reduce that population. And we're saying, no, thank you. We would rather let our children who come to the duck park see starving feral cats than consult somebody who can perhaps help us with this problem. Now, I could be wrong. They might not be willing to reduce the feeding and try to reduce the problem, but by not asking the question, I feel we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item of business was a swap of item 5 for 4. So we're going to be speaking on the capital improvement plan update for 2013 and 14, specifically for Parks and Rec. And Rob and Darren can remain at the table.
Yes, tonight's the Darren Anderson show, in case you didn't know. So Darren's going to continue as the parks open space into the golf maintenance manager. Really, a large part of his job is overseeing a variety of capital improvements in our parks. So with that, I'll pass it on to Darren.
Excellent. Good evening. Rob had shared that you would like an overview of the capital improvement project process. So what I tried to do was, in the document that I just passed out, obviously you haven't had a chance to review it, so I'll kind of walk you through it as best I can. It includes kind of the process of how we do it, how the city goes, the time frames, some of the criteria that must be met to make it a capital improvement project. And then it'll go into, I pulled out the relevant sections, the CSD-related sections of this book. This one's actually just the proposed, but the adopted one is very similar, and there's a link to it on that front cover page that I shared, so you can look it up at any time. And we'll kind of cover some of those. Some of them are ongoing CIPs, some of them are one-time, talk a little bit about how they're phased over time. It's a 5-year program that we have in here. So I'll just jump into that cover page. And yeah, for this one,
just FYI, there are 2 commissioners that haven't seen this before because they're new to the commission.
Sure.
So feel free to ask whatever you like.
And for this presentation, I'd welcome questions as we go.
Okay.
If that makes sense to the commission.
Yep.
So I did a little Q&A on this one because I had heard some of these questions in the past from prior commissions, and I thought, oh, you know what, maybe this will be useful. And so the first question was, does staff keep a list of these capital improvement projects? Because at that time, they weren't familiar with this document. This is, of course, the one I'm referencing, where you can see all the city's fiscal year CIPs. Again, capital improvement projects, CIP. And there's a link to it. The question on how the list is prioritized. There's a matrix that the city's used, and it's recently been updated, so the prior one has been changed out. This matrix is for the General Fund CIP Committee to make clear decisions on the importance and timing of it. And so it gets ranked point-wise. So each department that puts forward certain CIPs goes through this matrix and scores points for each of theirs. So there's required to meet legal mandates, and that may be things like ADA compliance, maybe different departments have different mandates. Like, for example, the landfill has certain legal mandates that they must follow that may dictate a CIP or give it a certain number of those 20 points, if that makes sense. Mitigates unacceptable community health and safety, and sometimes we use that one for really deteriorated conditions on trails where it's a safety issue, or another one could be netting, for example, at you'd get a certain number of points for netting to protect balls from going into parking lots and denting cars or hurting people or kids chasing those cars into the street, that kind of thing. Improves or maintains city facilities or infrastructure. Basically, take care of what you've got. How important is it? improves city operations and service delivery, and supports or furthers council vision and adopted plans. And we use that again oftentimes to support if we're specifically referencing a project that pertains to the Baylands Master Plan and that's cited, I would say allocate this number of points because it ties to the comp plan and the Baylands plan, that kind of thing. How are the parks and open space and recreation CIPs integrated with the rest of the cities? In two ways. One is they're ranked because you're competing for a similar pot of money in many cases. And so that ranking is one way. And then ultimately, they're all included into this large document together. The timing and the process for city IPs. The way it's typically worked for my involvement is city finance would provide us with a lump sum to say this is how much in general the whole city's got to deal with for this fiscal year in terms of capital improvements. I should note that the minimum cost of a CIP has to be $50,000 or greater. So if it's under that, you've got to find another way of addressing that need, either operating budget or some other way. And I'll note on that topic, sometimes within parks, you'll have $20,000, let's say, in benches and sign repairs. And sometimes we'll wait on those to say, okay, this playground's about to go meet its end of lifespan in 2 years. What if we wait and we include this with the irrigation that's got to happen, and you kind of wait to piecemeal pieces together? And sometimes we don't, because as I'll get into in a minute, we have a few ongoing CIPs that address things like benches, signs, fences, and amenities. We have a certain amount allocated every year, and so we don't always have to lump them up together like that. Yet sometimes we do, and so it's kind of a hybrid of both those. And here it mentions that the CIPs are planned out 5 years ahead of time, and I'll show you once we get to the subsequent pages. You'll see those scheduled out from 2014 to 2018, 2019. So the departments, from there, there's a report that was generated by the IBRIC, or Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission. It's called the Facility Needs Assessment Plan. And Commissioner Markovich may be able to speak to this in greater detail than I can. But what I end up seeing is a very, very large Excel spreadsheet that has all the city's needs. And the relevant parts to me are it breaks down the golf course or the open space or the parks and down to every detail. So it'll have Robles Park, picnic benches, and it'll have a certain allocated fund to say, there are 27 benches, let's say, that need to be replaced, and they aren't scheduled out here, so they go in this backlog column. And at some point, we've got to move that into one of the projected years and get that addressed. And we're kind of currently working with Public Works in the CIP project to pull out items that are in that IBRIC backlog and move them into a year to say, okay, we realize this should have been done a while ago. We're going to earmark it for 2017, and we're going to make it happen. So we often use that report, but also my division maintains its own spreadsheets to say, okay, this is the age of this one. We have continually monitoring, because even though the lifespan of a particular area may say, hey, we don't do irrigation but 25 years out, well, at the golf course, the salts in the soils limited that lifespan irrigation to 12 years, 13 years. So obviously, we're not going to follow the 25-year typical lifespan on irrigation. We're going to do real-world analysis of what we've got and push that CIP up where appropriate. Typically, what happens is mid-November, we start that CIP process. We'll have pre-thought out a lot of them. We'll have consulted with those, and we'll begin writing up the CIP requests, and then mid-November they get submitted. And typically that goes mid-November to December is your deadline for getting all that in. And I should note, in addition to that infrastructure plan and our own internal documents that have lifespans of different features in our parks, the one we'll be really looking forward to for guidance on CIPs for our division and our department will be that Parks Master Plan. It's a big element of it. We're hoping they'll give us guidance and say, okay, this is where you should be allocating that finite amount of funds, where you should put it, how to prioritize it. And the nice part is, via that process, I'm hoping there'll be a lot of community input that sometimes it's difficult to do every year for little CIPs, but through this bigger process, I'm hoping we can get a greater guidance and looking forward to that. The Interdepartment CIP Committee will end up ranking those projects according to that aforementioned matrix. Then the city manager will take that list, give it to the Finance Committee, And the Finance Committee's job is to see how closely those projects are consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. And then lastly, the council will approve the capital budget. Previously, we've had questions on what are the other sources of funding for capital improvement projects. Most of it is through the infrastructure reserve, but some projects have alternative sources, grants, donations, bonds, park development impact fees, or sometimes funds from other departments if they're having an impact from one of their projects on a park. I guess a good example is probably El Camino Park, where we've got a combination of utilities department contributions, park development impact fees, and then some contribution from one of our ongoing CIPs. That's the Open Space Trails and Amenities CIP. Another typical question could be how much money is there in the city budget for capital improvements to our division or our department? And it varies. It depends. Sometimes a high-ticket item comes up and it balloons up, and sometimes we have lower years. But on average, it's somewhere around that $3 million mark. And that would include features like Coverly, a roof, or it would include things like the Lucy Stern heating system. So it's not just park renovations that I'm referencing the entire department needs. What community organizations might help fund or fundraise for park improvements? We've had a variety. Friends of Palo Alto Parks are certainly one, but we've also had groups come forward for just one specialized project. And the Friends of Lytton Plaza is a good example for that one, where they came forward and donated significant funds to complete the plaza and the fountain. The Friends of the Magical Bridge, obviously, funding that entire, or the vast majority of that playground. The Save the Bay, which is a partnership organization of ours, funded the construction of a native plant nursery and the greenhouse at the Baylands. So a variety of different ways. As you turn in your packet, you'll see a little summary page. And this is, again, I pulled out the ones that were really relevant to CSD. You can see about 30 or so different projects. The first one on that list is Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. And that little PF preceding that one stands for Public Works Facilities. That's the department and division that is leading that one. So sometimes it has nothing, the organization who's running or the department that's running it isn't necessarily affiliated with CSD, but one of their projects, like the Americans with Disabilities Compliance one, has some element that affects our area. And if you turn to the following page where you see the Americans with Disability Act Compliance project, you'll see in 2014 it calls out restroom upgrades at Coverly. So again, they're impacting or affecting one of our areas, and that's very common.
So can you just take a couple of examples here of maybe things that were approved or
sure? Yeah,
recent?
I'll walk you things that,
and then
that I think.
And just describe the grid. How it plays out over the years.
Yeah. Let me turn to a good one that's a good fit for that.
Like Rinconada
Pool Locker Room. You can start with that one. Reference page is 104. If you look at page 104. So on the beginning of it, you'll see that kind of description, justification, and supplemental information, and CIP facts and relationship to comp plan mixed in there on the first page. And as you flip back, you'll see how that gets scheduled out. You'll see $400,000 in fiscal year 2015 allocated for construction costs. So these varying projects will be all over that map. Some will be in 2014, some in 2018, all depending on kind of how they fit. And I've seen them change. So it may originally be scheduled for 2018. Circumstances are such that either it gets pushed out or pushed forward, depending on how it looks. There are some that are unfunded. The following page, on page 162, it's park restroom installation. This was a CIP where we had typically had one park every year get a new restroom, and as you flip the page to the back, you'll see there's no funding currently allocated at all. And the reason for that was we put it on hold until the analysis from the Parks Master Plan would inform where we should best allocate that money.
And when is that going to be done?
Say again?
What's the time frame for that?
The completion, I think we're looking at probably a year. There's one more that I'll highlight, and these are kind of the ongoing CIPs, or an example of one. This is page 139. It's called Benches, Signs, Fences, Walkways, and Perimeter Landscaping. And you'll see that there's $150,000 allocated for each of the years, 2014 all the way through 2018. And it's ongoing, and it rolls over. And this is one like I mentioned earlier, sometimes there's only $20,000 that needs to be done at a particular park. The trash cans are rusted out and it needs new ones. This is often the CIP I turn to for that. Or in some cases where I've got one specific CIP for a project, let's say Scott Park, and I've exceeded the allocated budget. This is one way of taking just one element out of there, like the benches, let's say at Scott, and I could say, you know what I can do is I can fund the benches out of this other CIP and cover the rest through what was already allocated. And if the discrepancy is too big, we do a budget amendment ordinance. And that's kind of a snapshot of the capital improvement projects.
Great. So that's an overview, and then obviously the current update relative to those projects that affect areas of our jurisdiction and related areas. So, were there any specific questions, or otherwise you have some good bedtime reading here? Commissioner Hedderly.
I have a few questions. First of all, I wanted to know if the interdepartment CIP committee, are all departments represented on that committee, and presumably Parks and Open Space and Recreation have some role there.
Yeah.
Greg, I don't know how that
my understanding is it's the department heads, and so our department head, Greg Betts, sits at the table and advocates for our programs.
And is there any publication of the rankings? Is there any way for the public to understand as they look at a CIP that looks like this in the budget? Is there any way for the public to understand why that particular CIP got priority for funding this year as opposed to a different CIP?
Not that I know of.
So the rankings are strictly internal.
As far as I understand.
And my last question is how, there are a lot of ongoing projects and a lot of projects that are sort of waiting in the queue. How did new projects get added that aren't already in the queue? And is there a different timeline for instigating that than the regular budget process?
Mostly the same timeline, and that does happen quite a bit where all of a sudden the need emerges and we didn't realize it. And so it's, and sometimes it can move right up to the front, even though it all depends on, you know, kind of how you've justified it. And even with that matrix, I always found this kind of interesting, even with that matrix where you've got different scoring and you see 25 for health and safety. Well, if the health and safety is so extreme, it's going to jump to the front. It'll be a 2015 project. If it's truly that extreme, we're going to do it right away. We're not going to say, well, you only scored 10 points on council priorities, so technically you fall below the boardwalk repair. No, it's going to take a priority, and typically that kind of thing usually moves forward as soon as possible.
And presumably the Finance Committee, when they inform departments about how much money is available, they don't designate a department by department budget for CIPs. They designate an overall budget for CIPs, and then the interdepartmental committee works it out between yourselves who gets how much for what.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Oh, you got it. Oh, great. Thanks.
Question. Thank you for clarifying this. I've been on the commission a long time, and I still need a lot of review on how this is done. You mentioned that, I like the section where, so you mentioned that we get a lot of the park CIPs funded through the infrastructure reserve, and then you gave us a grid. So I guess I have two questions. Does that grid change year to year? Do people change the priorities of how they rank? You know, how these points are allocated?
I know, I don't know for year to year, but I know 2 years ago it was a different one. And so there's been some tweaks, but to tell you the truth, I don't know how frequently that changes.
Okay. And so when we do the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, we're going to generate a list of needs, and it's going to be prioritized. And it's going to be prioritized based on criteria that are different from this point system. So, and I know we have some other sources of funding, not just infrastructure reserve. We have the park impact fees, and you list a couple other sources. But is that going to be at odds how we do one prioritization and then it has to fit into another grid? Or do you foresee any issues with that?
That's a very good question. My experience, and I don't profess to be an expert in the CAP process. I haven't been involved as in depth as perhaps some other staff, but I can say the justification that staff can make is often held with great weight. So it's not just the scoring. As I mentioned before, if health and safety was so dramatic, regardless of the scoring, it's still going to move forward in my experience. And I think the same can be said for the Parks Master Plan, and I think that'll be a great justification as we write that in and say, hey, we did some exhaustive research to find out what's needed on a comprehensive and holistic scale to say this is the overall needs of parks. I think it's going to be compelling, and I think I don't foresee problems even if the matrix were to change and greater weight was put on a different priority perhaps. My hunch is that we'll be able to proceed with those recommendations pretty well.
Okay. Commissioner Rexall?
How does the CIP compare to the rest of the budget? You know, if you look at how much you spend on the parks each year, how much does that come from CIP and how much comes from other sources from the city?
Oh, I see. Our operating budget versus CIP?
Yeah.
What do you think? About $3 million for CIP process, and then
The operating budget's approximately $20 million for community services, of which we recover about $8 million in revenues.
Okay, so revenue off is about maybe 20% or so.
Okay. Thanks, Darren. Very good. So the next item on the agenda is a PIP and an ordinance relative to a PIP for Scott Park Capital Improvement Project. And Darren, you're still front and center, but I see your compatriot back there who can talk about the landscape design. So
there he is. Yeah. City landscape architect Peter Jensen's here tonight and very knowledgeable about this kind of thing, so I welcome his input at any point. So I'm here tonight to ask the Commission to recommend that City Council approve a Park Improvement Ordinance, PIO, for the design of Scott Park. This CIP was approved for $100,000 in 2012. It was intended to replace existing. So we had old picnic tables, we had uplifted play surface for the basketball court, we had an aged and broken playground swing and other equipment in the surfacing. We held a public meeting on Tuesday, August 26, 2012. We had about 15 members of the public join, and we presented the initial plan for the park, received general support. However, there was a contingency of the public that said, hey, you know what we could really use at this park is a bocce court. And I had, at that time, had said, that's something we'll certainly look into. You know, I've got this earmarked, and we're going to primarily use it all on replacing the existing. And the steam, so to speak, for this movement for bocce started to pick up. And I had Councilmember Burt come meet with Director Betts and myself and say, you know, I'm getting a lot of residents coming to me and saying, we really want this. Could you please look to see if we can make this happen? And so staff reached out to that stakeholder group and met with them and find out really what their needs were and how big the group is that is so interested in bocce. We visited surrounding bocce courts to see how popular it is, what are kind of the impacts are we talking about, what's been successful design-wise, because there's all sorts of different sizes and configurations, that kind of thing. And so we came back with our landscape architect, Eddie Chow, who did this design, and asked him to start looking to see how we could make this fit. Peter Jensen also came out with us, with the stakeholders, took measurements, and looked at every configuration we could to find the most successful one. But then there needed to be more public outreach, because at our initial public meeting, I did have a resident, one of the maybe approximate 15, who said, hey, wait a minute, even in the idea phase of proposing something like that, I'm really against anything that's going to add to the noise of this park. I'm already dealing with the basketball court. I'm really sensitive to that. I live, you know, on this corner of the park, and it's only a stone's throw away. I really am against that. And so I heard that and kind of expressed it to the other stakeholders, and they had done a lot of outreach. They said, you know, let us try to reach out and win people over. But knowing that I only got 15 to that public meeting, what I thought was I want to try a different way of doing outreach, and I wanted to try this public survey, an online survey. And having not done it myself, I didn't know exactly how it would work, and I was really pleased with the results. We got 93 participants to respond to this online survey, and the nice part is it gives you a really good breakdown of how people, it was a very simple survey. Do you support bocce? Do you like this design? And what are your comments? And it was about 85.4%, I think it was, that said, yes, we support the design, we support bocce, and we want it there. And then the other percentage was against it. And so those 11 people had voted no. And then they could make their comments below. And most of the no's were associated with noise. They just didn't want to take such a small park and have something that they feared would be noisy. After seeing those responses, I'm not an avid bocce player. I've played it once or twice, but I didn't know what that typically looks like. So the bocce courts I visited were during work hours during the daytime, and they weren't being used. And so I visited 2 courts on my weekend just to see. And I realized that's kind of hit or miss. 2 visits does not constitute a full analysis of how loud the bocce is going to be. But I did find, in my findings, there were people playing every weekend at these 2 that I visited, one in Mountain View, one in San Francisco. And it was about the comparable noise that you'd get with a group playing horseshoes. It was mainly quiet with the periodic, yeah, nice shot, that kind of thing. So that's, for what it's worth, I did a little site analysis, and those are kind of my findings. At this point, I'd like to walk you through just some of the design elements here. Can we switch to the next page? I realize this is very hard to see on this. This is not helpful, so I'm just going to kind of talk you through it. Essentially,
It was all really hard to see in the packet, too. In contrast to the ones that we usually get from you, Peter, that are large and colored and instruction, this looked like a circuit diagram or something.
That's evidence of how good our landscape architect is.
It's size to the park. Good point.
So in the playground area here, this is existing. So it's calling out what will change. The surfacing and the playground gets swapped out. The surfacing of this picnic area and the tables that are old get swapped out. The surfacing for the basketball court gets swapped out. It's all uplifted and cracked. The basketball hoop itself gets moved. That was based on feedback I had from, we had done a series of measurements when we came out in the very early investigations for the CIP, and I talked to guys playing pickup and said, hey, we're going to come back out here and fix up this court, which is all uplifted. And the response was, that's wonderful, thank you. Is there any way you could reconfigure this so we can have a better play area? And I said, yeah, it sounds, I play basketball, and I was looking at it and said, yes, I would absolutely, if it were me, I would want that. And then I met with another group on a different day, same request. And I thought, okay, I think we could do this. And so we're going to, I'll show you on the next slide where it gets moved to. These existing bollards are all rotted out. They're original to the park, it looks like, so at least 30 years old or so. And now I'll switch to the next screen. So this is the revised playground area, the fixed up picnic area, very similar, same location, basically the same footprint. The new hoop now has a key, a basketball key, painted onto the court, and it's reconfigured so it's no longer in the corner, but rather in the center. There was one comment during the public process saying, hey, if you could just make a small change right as this pathway leads out onto the road, can you just do this small grate change? It was some really tiny minor thing that we said, yeah, we can absolutely add that project. It's low cost, essentially allows people to cut that corner a little easier, less likely to make an accident. Then of course the big change, the removal of the turf in this little section and the installation of this bocce court. The rest of the schematics show a little bit of irrigation added to here and some of the plantings with some native plants. It's fairly minor. It's just to enhance that area, which is mostly barren at this point. And then there's some detail sheets that I think are less relevant. And with that, unless Peter has something to add, I would turn it to the commission.
I've got one question. Is there, okay.
A procedural question. This, I guess this is the first time we've seen this. Is there an urgency to approve this tonight?
A very fair question. As I mentioned earlier, it was this one was funded in 2012, so we had that meeting a full year ago. And so I feel compelled, just personally, I've been working on this to leave people with a park they can use. Right now, that playground has been out of commission for like 7 months, 6 months, and I would like to see it move forward as quickly as possible. My hope was that I would come away with that survey with a substantial number of people saying, yes, we like this. In my opinion, you're never going to get 100% compliance, and 85.4% is pretty darn good. And my hope was I could convince the commission to say, you know what, this sounds good, you've done the right amount of outreach, and we can move forward and get this project going. I know from my own workload, sometimes there are delays in me getting back to you. It doesn't necessarily always work out. I get to come to the next commission meeting, or maybe there's the commission meeting doesn't happen. Next thing I know, I'm 3 or 4 months out, and I feel like I've unduly delayed this. So that's my rationale for bringing this forward as an action item, and if the commission decides to need some more time to think about it, no problem.
Okay. Commissioner Berkeley, do you have a comment?
Looking at, I see one bike rack on here, but on the notes I see there's listed 2 bike racks. Where's the other bike rack? There's one by the bocce.
Yes, there is one. I believe it's right here, but you know what? I can't see it on that plan. Give me 1 second to reference this. I can see a little closer.
I mean, it just seems to me that this is a small park, but still 2 bike racks for a park seems not sufficient.
Yeah, I believe the current design has 2 bike racks. There was some talk of perhaps making the bollards, those 4 bollards, combination bollard bike racks, but the design instead implemented just keeping those as standard bollards.
How do you decide for parks how many bike racks to put in?
You know, there isn't a standard. Sometimes we consult transportation, and they give some insight. For example, at El Camino Park, they're the ones who looked at that and said, you should have, or you would want this. For a pocket park, it's a little different. We did ask at the community meeting. Didn't get a lot of strong feedback on that.
I mean, I can see, especially with my kids, I know if they go to the park with their friends, there's just a whole flock of bikes going at one time. And 2 bike racks just wouldn't cut it. So I would want you to go back and see if you could find some spot to squeeze a couple more bike racks in.
I'm sure we could.
Okay, before we get into comments from the commission, we do want to do public comment. There's about a half a dozen folks. So the first speaker is Andrew Robel. There we go. And 3 minutes.
I come down in here and just sit on that seat there.
Yep. Right. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm Andrew Robel. I'm president of the Woodmark Homeowners Association. We are the large condominium development directly across the street from Scott Park. We have 36 families, and we are opposed to a bocce ball court. And it's a tiny, tiny little park. There's precious little nice grassy areas in the downtown area. Please don't pave over more sod to put in a bocce ball court, which, as far as we know, is a highly, well, let's say not a very popular sport, very limited. I haven't heard any numbers from Mr. Anderson as to how many bocce ball players there are, and if it is such a pressing issue in Palo Alto, why were bocce ball courts not considered for the larger parks? This is a tiny little park, and we are the most directly affected because we're across the street, and the survey, I think, is not, and we're all in favor of improving Scott Park, but not paving over sod and not having more sporting events going in this tiny little area. So, see, I don't know how I've been timing myself, but as far as the survey goes, it only asked for zip codes of the respondents. So it's like so many developments. If there's there are a lot of handy or desirable developments that I would like to see, but not on my block, please. So the point I'm making is addresses were not put into the survey. These respondents don't live across the street, most of them. They live some distance away, and if they live some distance away, of course, they have no objection to having sporting facilities as long as it doesn't directly affect them with noise, with clutter, with cheering, whatever it is. So I respectfully, on behalf of 36 families of Woodmark Condominium Association, ask you to approve the proposal with a deletion of the bocce ball court.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Peggy Woodworth.
I am very much in favor of the bocce ball court, and I live a 1-minute walk away. And I bought my bocce balls in Paris 20 years ago, and I look forward to using them. And to address your question, just as a side point about bikes, you know, I've lived there for 40 years. I walk by that park 10 times a day. I almost never see a bike, so I think most people walk to that little park, but that's just a side point. But I can't wait to have the bocce ball court. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Keith Gilbert.
Well, if Peggy is a minute away, we're 30 seconds away, right down Scott from Addison, on Addison. And I will say that I've talked to a large number of the residents along Addison and Scott, and have an almost universal enthusiasm for a bocce court in Scott Park. I guess the word that comes to mind for me is it's a very appropriate activity to have in the park. The park is very much of a neighborhood thing. Bocce is a sport that is very inclusive. Age groups, athletic abilities of all sorts. Everyone can go out and play bocce. It really brings neighbors together. The second thing that makes it appropriate is bocce is a very quiet activity. I've participated occasionally in bocce games in North Beach, San Francisco, and as Darren commented about, the only sound you hear out of us is someone saying, yeah, when you hit the other guy's ball or something like that. So I think it is a quiet activity that fits well into the neighborhood park. And the final point I'd make is that it's appropriate because it will get a commitment from neighbors like myself. I will commit to you that when the bocce court goes in, I will personally purchase a set of bocce balls. I'll make them accessible for people in our neighborhood, and I also will personally organize bocce open games and activities for the neighborhood. We've got a great eclectic neighborhood. It's really a good way of bringing people together. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Looks like a city revenue opportunity there, Parks and Recs. The next speaker is, I'm not quite sure I can read this, Mike Midolo.
Commissioners, good evening. First of all, I want to thank you for your dedication. Many years ago here in Palo Alto, I had the opportunity to serve on a commission, and I appreciate the fact that this is a great deal of responsibility that you have on your shoulders, and it also requires a lot of your time. I want to say to you, I want to look at each and every one of you and have you understand that as someone who has lived in Palo Alto for over 18 years and live immediately adjacent to the park, that our voice, the people who live immediately adjacent to the park, has not been heard at all. I want to emphasize that while I appreciate the enthusiasm that's presented here by staff, that many of the things that you see up on this chart are not representative of what truly goes on in that park. We happen to live immediately opposite where those picnic tables are. There's another residence on the other side, immediately on the perimeter of that entire section at the top. That's all single-family homes. There's a small residential complex that has about 5 apartments in it that's closer. The bocce ball court is being proposed specifically over the area where the seniors in wheelchairs from the senior center are walked around by their children. Right there, they're proposing removing that area. The picnic tables, I can't believe that staff has not considered all of the calls that have been placed over the years regarding the activity at those picnic tables and why those picnic tables, if they're to remain in the park, need to be moved out where police can more effectively monitor the activities there. The amount of calls that they get for pot, the amount of calls that they get for inappropriate activity that I will not expand upon in this venue are numerous. There have been modifications to the basketball court rules with specific signage indicating that at sunset, no basketball can be played there. There's a reason that's there, because many years ago, we had to go ahead and bring that to the attention of council. This park is less than a block away from Heritage Park, a far larger venue, which would be perfectly appropriate for larger gatherings and activity. Unfortunately, what you are doing is increasing the noise in that area, the density, and we all know that Palo Alto already has issues with regards to density and its land use. But to increase that in the smallest park in the city of Palo Alto is not only insensitive, but incredibly inappropriate. And while outside of the context of feedback from the people who immediately are impacted by this and immediately live, we have 36 families being represented by the gentleman over here that spoke earlier. They're a block away. We're on the other side of the fence. I can tell you, there are gatherings of 80 people over at those picnic tables. PAPD has to be called constantly. There are rat issues associated with the placement of those garbage receptacles exactly where they are. There is no shortage of issues. I understand I'm at a time limit. I just want to say how truly you need to push this issue back for review, for a more expanded feedback from the community, and staff certainly needs to do a much better job of reaching out, because trust me, they have not been doing that.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Neil O'Sullivan.
Good evening. I'm the one who went to the meeting a year ago because I live in that corner of the park. I've been there for 20 years. I'm the one who had to come here in 1998, 1997 to have the rules amended in the park so that we could have the cooking grates removed and have alcohol banned from the park, because homeless people had moved in and it was a miserable mess in there with them drinking and urinating and vomiting all day. When I met a year ago with Darren, I explained to him that I live, my back door is 10 feet from the fence. Where that bocce ball court is planning on going, that's about 9 feet from the fence. 5 feet from the fence is the back door of an apartment building, 4 units. It's way too close for anyone. Do you want a bocce ball court 15 feet from your backyard, your back door? I don't think you do. I don't. This park has been nothing but noise for us. We want the courts moved out into a larger park, not more courts moved in. It's too small. That is a quarter-acre park. It's tiny. It's claustrophobic as it is, and you're planning on making it worse. I don't see why Parks and Recreation is not listening to the residents who live on that park. It's too noisy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is, it's Joanne Woodworth? John? Sorry.
Hi, my name's John Woodworth, and good evening. And I'm for the bocce court. I've lived there on Addison and Bryant for 40 years before the park was there. I was involved in the park being built, and I think it's been a great park. We don't see the kinds of things that these other people have described, even though we're there quite frequently. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And the last speaker is Richard Brandt.
Good evening, Commissioners, Councilmember Schmidt. Good to see you here. By the way, I want to thank Darren Anderson. I think he's done a real good job of outreach here. I first attended the meeting a year ago, right? And a lot of the people I hear talking tonight were not at that meeting. It was sent out as a general notice. We had a good turnout, and that's where the discussion came up about the bocce ball court. I know Mr. O'Sullivan showed up late and then expressed his concern, and I guess my feeling at the time I talked to him said this park's been there for 40 years. It's a park, not a cemetery, and if you move in next to a railroad track and you say, okay, I don't mind the tracks, but I don't want a train, you know there's going to be something going on. We've got a park here, a place for exuberance, joy, and excitement. It's not a cemetery. It's going to be noisy. Heck, there's a basketball court there. There's a kids, you can see where the kids' place is. This park was put in because in the area at the time, there was no park. Now we do have Heritage Park. It's become a wonderful place, but it's a different park. They play soccer in that park. It's kids, and it's wide open. The beauty of the Scott Park is that it's a community close kind of an element, and I would just remind people that ex-mayor Yahweh Ye encouraged this idea to have a community resource where people can enjoy exercise or coming together as a local community with parks. And in this case, we thought bocce was a good one because we don't have bocce ball. Somebody said that on Embarcadero, the lawn bowling is not bocce ball. Lawn bowling is a totally different thing on the Embarcadero Road. So we thought this was a good example of how to fulfill what Mayor Ye said in terms of bringing communities together. And it fit nicely in this park that's, to be honest, underutilized. So I fully support this thing, and I think that the noise issue is a bogus issue. You're a parks commission, not a cemetery commission, and so therefore let's enjoy and utilize our parks and follow in the line of what Mayor Ye proposed, where we bring the community together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that is the last speaker card. Okay. Okay, we can just go to commission questions or comments, and we can do some of that, but if we're going to get to a motion, then we should get to a motion before we really debate it. Okay, Commissioner Markovich?
I have a question regarding public outreach. A year ago, how was that performed? Was it done geographically around the park, or?
Yes. Geographically, mailers sent around the park.
So how far out?
We've got some standards. I think Peter probably follows the same ones. What's the norm you do?
Well, it's 600 feet basically is what the standard is, but normally whatever touches around and then the block that's facing that is what gets it. I don't know specifically how the boundary was drawn to generate the addresses, but it's much bigger than the normal 600 feet is.
So this little park is in here, and then is it Channing? That it's, and then across the street is the condos, and then on the other side of the condos is Heritage Park, correct?
Close enough, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Others? Yeah, Commissioner Crummy?
Darren, did you hear back from any of the residents who are opposed to the bocce ball court that they didn't receive the notice a year ago to come out?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Is there any, I visited the park today, actually. I've never been there before, and I also live across the street from a little park like this, so I feel a sort of kindred spirit with this neighborhood. I live across the street from Monroe Park. And we also struggle with the same issues of what do you do with such a small space, and what do you do with it? So I really am of two minds in this. So there's a lot of ways you can go, but I just want to ask a couple exploratory questions. When you considered the placement of the bocce ball court, did you consider other locations, and can you just describe how you came to that spot?
Yes, I'll let Peter get into more detail, but I was sensitive to what Mr. Sullivan, who was the gentleman who spoke to me at the meeting, saying, hey, I really don't want this. I heard him. I brought it up to Councilmember Burt when we met with him. I brought it up to the bocce enthusiasts who met with me. I understand and I get it. I'm in a difficult spot. I've got to serve the community and present the commission with everything that I've found and say, this is what I've done. I'm not biased one way or the other than to want to give the best park I can to our community. When we originally looked at it, I heard what he said, and I was trying to put it as far away as we could, which was this piece of turf right in here. Unfortunately, it didn't fit. There's a tree in the middle that happened to be dedicated to a former mayor that we couldn't touch. And there just wasn't any other good options. Perhaps Peter could speak in more details of that, but we looked at every other measurement we could to make it fly, and it didn't fit.
Did you look along the edge of the basketball court, so just pivoting it 90 degrees? Pivoting the bocce ball court down by 90 degrees, so it goes alongside the basketball court. Did it fit there?
We did. I think it technically would fit. It was more of the impact to both irrigation reconfiguration at that point, where you're splitting the turf into smaller segments that become difficult to irrigate, and then as well taking a large, essentially the better you push it off to the side of the turf, the more you have a usable area for some other activity laying around. It was a compromise, trying to find the best spot we could that would still give you as much green space as you could that was contiguous, not bifurcated by a bocce.
Did you work with the opponents of the bocce ball court to let them help you locate it? No, I know it sounds like you were very constrained, but
I did not.
Did they show an interest in that, or they were just dead set against it?
There was no opportunity at that point.
Okay.
Proffered. I met with the stakeholders of bocce to find out where they wanted it. And,
were the opponents at that meeting?
No, it was that was not a public meeting. It was just meeting. I just wanted to meet with the bocce enthusiasts to find out what they wanted. I had offered at that meeting some other alternatives, and we're looking at bocce for Rinconada. Where else could we meet this need? We have a parks master plan coming up, but the enthusiasm was building, and there were so many people who wanted it. We started exploring this.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Commissioner Ashland.
The 15 people at the community meeting increased to 93 people responding to the survey is a great increase, but do we have a feel for what percentage of the stakeholders that 93 number is?
What percentage of the stakeholders of what, bocce?
No, of the neighborhood surrounding the park. So we don't have a sense of numbers. Okay, because it's hard to say if that's a good percentage or not. The other question is, in the comments of the people who...
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
In the comments of the people who were opposed, there were numerous suggestions to place the bocce court at Heritage Park, which is nearby. Did we look at that?
We did. The group of enthusiasts was very specific about wanting it at Scott.
Thank you.
First of all, Darren, I really do appreciate the outreach that you did on this. I think it's pretty rare that we get so much community engagement on any park redevelopment planning. So I think that the survey was significant in getting people to speak up and participate, and I think that's great. Obviously, there's lots of support for bocce, but there's also non-negligible concern about the noise of placing it in that small park. I guess my initial reaction is that low-intensity uses are appropriate to a site of that size and location, but this is exactly the kind of question that we want to address through the long-range master plan, is if we're able to identify a demand for a particular service, we ought to be looking citywide to figure out where is the best place to locate that function or that facility. So I wonder if we're not getting ahead of ourselves trying to construct it here in this tiny park where there is significant opposition. So my question, long-winded question to you, is this a situation where we have significant savings from installing a bocce court as part of this park renovation? Or is it something that can wait? Can we do all the other improvements and decide about where bocce is going to end up? And it may end up at that location. But can we split it in two and do it as a phased project? And I'll let you answer that before I move on to my next.
My impression is that it would not be significant savings if we deferred it. We were not going. If we did it all together, we're not going to save more than if we had deferred it. Not significantly. Okay.
Then my next issue is I loved that you included all the comments in the packet. That was really helpful to kind of get the specifics of people's input. I was concerned, as many commenters were, about the picnic table safety issues. And I wonder if you did consider moving them to a more visible location, and if you did and decided not to, why? And if you considered alternately adding lighting to that area to make it less attractive.
The location, at that initial public meeting, no one voiced any concern over the location of those picnic tables. That wasn't one of the comments. I took notes. No one said that shouldn't be there. And I asked what they want to change, what's working. I didn't hear that. As far as lighting, I've heard mixed things. Sometimes lights attract people to hang out. I don't know the exact right way to do that. I know for the budgetary process, adding additional light would be cost prohibitive on what I've already got allocated for that. It's not to say it couldn't happen. And if the commission decides to go for further outreach, that'd be certainly something I could look into. And you had asked about the potential relocation to the picnic area. My colleague Peter Jensen has a great eye for that kind of thing, and I don't know if he could do an armchair analysis of that or not for other spots, but it wasn't looked at during our process.
Okay. And my next question is about the swings in the sand area. And I'm sure you know exactly what my question is because I ask it every single time. The sand, I think we're losing all the useful, playable sand in the city, and I hate to see all the sand eliminated from that spot. It's related to the swings. Is currently, the existing swings, are they only toddler swings, or is there a big kid swing there as well?
It's just toddler.
Just toddler. So you're proposing to maintain just a toddler swing.
Yeah, in place.
So if that were the way you go, then I don't see any reason to get rid of the sand, because toddlers aren't falling out of their swings and they're not swinging in a high radius that would make it dangerous for sand players in the vicinity. So I would encourage you to include the sand, to retain the sand. I also would wonder about whether or not it makes sense to include a big kid swing, not just a toddler swing. I think there are swings at Heritage Park, is that right? And they are big kid swings?
Yes.
So that may be fine. I would defer to the community preference of whether they want to retain it as a toddler area. But I think the sand should be addressed.
Can I answer the sand? That was brought up in the public meeting as well as effort to save money. A number of people said, hey, we're fine with sand too. There wasn't strong feelings towards it in regards to having sand. It was more of, it's an opportunity to save money because the pour and play is expensive. Unfortunately, there's Americans with Disabilities Act that requires accessible surfacing when you replace or renovate a playground. And sand is not accessible. You've got your choice of synthetic materials like wood fiber and your pour-and-plays. So in some ways, we're bound by law to swap that out. Now, it's not to say there couldn't be opportunities maybe to retain some sand there.
And is that ADA requirement apply even in the case of toddler swings where
Yes.
every toddler that ever gets in a swing is picked up and put there?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that requirement is not just based on children, but then the caregivers that are with the children as well and providing them access to the swing set. So if they are the ones that are putting the child into the swing, that they have the same amount of access to that swing. It's not really based on the toddlers because they really can't climb into the swing and access it anyway. So it's more about the caregivers being able to access that point, and that's basically where the ADA comes in.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Oh, well, since I agree with so much you said, I'm going to go next. Public outreach was the one meeting. Is that correct, Darren?
That's correct.
Right.
And then the survey.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of surveys, and that's good data, particularly granularity, as Commissioner Hitterly said. I'm a little bit fuzzy on the statistics courses I took, though, and I don't know what is a representative sample size, but if there were 2,000 people living in the neighborhood, we wouldn't argue that this is predictable of, how the presidential election would come out with 85 votes. So it's a good indicator, but I'm not sure it's definitive. And, we've had, how many public outreach meetings that we had in Rinconado, which is a larger park, I grant you, but it seems like about 10 or 20, doesn't it, Commissioner Markovich, since we're on that ad hoc committee? So one is good, but, 3 might have been better, just to pick up folks in different, configurations of vacations and stuff. One of the things that was a revelation was hearing about the issues on the picnic tables and basketball courts. And I didn't realize the problems were, quite as loud as that and profane as that. So I sort of feel like maybe we should have another mitigation discussion, like we just did on another issue, which is, should we be trading off some things here? Should we put in bocce ball, which I think generally is a quiet sport, but, take out some basketball courts to reduce the noise so that there's kind of a trade-off here, a carbon trading, whatever there is. I actually, I've played some bocce ball, and I've played it in company groups in Los Gatos, I think, accompanied by Italian wine. And it still didn't get loud because there was just, kind of, inappropriate cheer. So I don't think that maybe is such a big issue, but it may be the straw on the Scott Park Camel's back. So perhaps there's a way of getting a mitigation changeover here. That said, if there can't be for whatever reason, and it's odd that we might be recommending moving picnic tables out of parks, but short of that, then I really think we should have it more well lit. I mean, the park that was designed for Cogswell was achieved a lot of objectives, relative to what's the way to say it? Less than perfect social behavior in there, and so if you can get visibility and on that, I think that would really help that. I'm respectful of the fact that Scott Park is its own community, but if you're a half a block or a block or whatever it is away from Heritage Park, then maybe you should spread your arms out a little bit and broaden the community. So in other words, maybe there's some of these things that could better be put in Heritage, including basketball. I don't know. And then I'm a little concerned just overall about questioning whether this is precedent setting. So we had $100,000 CIP, and council member asked for some investigation, which is perfectly fine, and we get a vote back that indicates that of the people that saw and took the survey, let's spend another $20,000 to put in, so what do we do with the next park and the next council request? So I'm a bit concerned about that, just as a precedent set. And think that is it. But this idea of maybe removing something, stuck with me relative to the comments that were there. Yep, Commissioner Markovich?
Well, in terms of mitigation, if you have that bocce court where it's currently located, and one of the issues seems to be the picnic area that's in the corner where it can't be seen, why don't you relocate the picnic benches to under the tree where the grassy area is so it can be seen from Channing? And that way it gets it out of that corner.
Can I just verify, you were suggesting moving the picnic tables to where? The grassy area?
If you go to the bigger, see this long strip where you said there's a tree in the middle so they couldn't put the bocce court, and that's right down there is where it goes out onto Channing. But if you relocated the picnic area under that tree and it pulls it out of that corner, which seems to be one of the problems, then the bocce court's fine. It seems it's a mitigation thing. It's a give and take. They stay in the park, but they're more visible. They're out of that corner.
It does put it right next to Mr. Sullivan's back fence, I believe, unfortunately.
Well, if you move the picnic tables to the front left and then slid the bocce back a bit, then you'd be swapping some noise. The current noise that's generated by the picnic tables will be somewhat replaced by the noise from the bocce, and the picnic tables would move to the front where there's no immediate neighbors. So at least wouldn't make matters worse. It would be the treading water.
Do you see where I'm saying? If you use your, right down in there.
Yeah. Like on this side of the fence or something, or this side of the tree. There's a tree kind of in the center. You're proposing something in this area generally?
Oh, you put them on either side of the trunk. You don't. So they're not against a fence. They're on either side of the trunk. You can still do it under the drip line, and I don't think it would affect the tree that much.
Typically, we put picnic tables on a pad, which would be problematic next to a tree, but I'm sure we could. What do you think, Peter? We could find a way.
Yeah, I think if we were going to look at relocating the picnic tables, that we should explore the options of then where those are going to be. I think in a park that size, the green space is important. Trying to place objects out in the middle of turf is not the easiest thing because of the irrigation and the mowing that has to take place around it. I would put it closer to the edge of the pathway and maybe closer to the basketball hoop area, just so that the hardscape is all confined within itself and it's leaving open a bigger area, but it's still allowing it to be visually open, and so you could see the tables at night as patrol drove down basically Channing and looked in to the park. And then basically, if we were going to move the tables away from that zone in the corner, I would say it's the corner itself that is attracting to those at night that want to be secluded. So really, we would not develop that corner anymore. We would just basically leave it open. So I think there's opportunities to look at that. I think just in this process, in the first community meeting, the tables are existing in that location now, and there was no real conversation about them being a nuisance. So, but if that's something that's brought up now, then I think there's something that we can definitely look at.
Is there room at Heritage to add basketball hoops? I just don't know.
I'd have to do more analysis.
Because that would help you with a lot of issues. Green space, open space, and it's the noisiest of any of the sports that are going on there, that's for sure.
If we wanted to look at an option like that, I would recommend deferring it to the Parks Master Plan rather than a one-off site analysis specifically at Heritage to see.
To Commissioner Hedley's point. Yep, go ahead.
Okay. To echo Commissioner Hedley's issue, I'm pro sand too. So if we could find some way of at least keeping some of the sand or having another sand play area, it would be nice not to have all those ripped out of every park, because there's an age where that is just a magical way of playing, a very imaginative way of playing, and it's just not the same to have bark. It's not the same park experience.
Let's put a sand pit where the picnic benches are right now.
Yeah, could you put sand in the back left there? And if you put sand in, you have to put some water, because dry sand is just no fun to play in.
Preferably waves, if you can work that out.
Yes. But also then, I also am pro bocce. I think this is a really good idea. I think we need to scrub the design a little more to look at it, but I think if the neighbors are in favor of it, I think this would be a really good test case and see is an asset to the community or not. I see the potential for it being a very social sport. Like they were saying earlier, kids can play with their grandparents. It's very good. You can't play basketball with your grandparents. It's just not nearly as good. What would be the surface for the bocce court?
I believe we went with DG on decomposed granite.
Okay.
It's like a gold fine type material.
Okay. And what kind of maintenance would be on that?
You know, I visited that site in, forgive me, the Mountain View Park, and met with the park supervisor that maintains it. It's fairly low. They had some drainage problems that I think we can address via the design and make work for us that will reduce it more so. So I'm not anticipating too great a maintenance.
But
there will be an increase.
do you have to plane it, rake it or whatever to keep it smooth?
Typically, it's the users. A tool is often left. At least that's at both courses I visited. There was a device left to rake it and scrape it and groom it, and that's typically done by the user groups. The extra burdens for staff would be extra edging and whipping as grass creeps up the sides of the areas. Periodically, the DG will have to be more than just groomed. It'll have to be resurfaced in a way, hardening agent added, rolled and compacted, that kind of thing. Nothing overly onerous from what I hear from the Palo Alto colleagues. I'm sorry, the Mountain View colleagues.
Okay. Now, another issue, when I looked at this design, I saw the bocce sitting there. I thought, you really should have a couple benches. You have one small little bench there. And then I think about going through Monroe Park, and that's where the homeless people sleep. And so in park design, are benches good or bad?
Well, I think that it's dependent upon how the bench is designed. So the older benches that are long and big provide a lot better of a sleeping environment than the new ones that have a handrail every 5 feet that don't allow you to stretch out and become too comfortable on it. So it's really about the bench itself, and I think any new bench that we put in there would be of a new design that would discourage sleeping on the bench from happening.
Okay, so when it says relocated bench, that doesn't necessarily mean the same physical bench. It just means you're trying to keep the same total number of benches, and these are new benches?
No, those are the existing ones relocated.
Okay, and the new ones are the ones with the handles on it, so you can't sleep on it?
That's right. Well, I think they're 6 foot. They're about 5 to 6 feet benches, which is the standard. It's the like 8 foot benches where you've got to put the partition to stop folks from sleeping, typically.
Okay, and the other parks, do they have benches nearby?
Like Heritage, for example?
No, the other bocce parks, like in Mountain View.
Yes, there was one bench at the Mountain View one, kind of in the center, and then the same design we're using, the end backstop is concrete that ends up being kind of one you could sit on.
Okay.
It's like, 20 inches high. It's kind of a low. We just saw people sitting on that one that seemed to be kind of a de facto bench, if you will.
So I would think if you're taking turns rolling, you would
you'd
want someplace to sit down near the ends. And right now you have one in the middle, and that might be good for spectators. For the people who are actually doing the bocce would want something towards the ends.
And one end has that raised concrete edge that I'm talking about, and then the other end has an accessible gate, I believe.
I'm just, if the seniors are sitting there, I don't think they want to be sitting on I don't know how tall the concrete would be, but I would think a real bench with a real back would be much more comfortable. And I would think it would be well used. Like I said, I'm nervous about benches because I see the downside to them. So anyway, in summary, I think this is good. Also the bike parking, I would take a second look at that and make sure that you're happy with 2. If 4 can be fit without compromising, I think that'd be a good idea.
I'd be glad to talk to our transportation. They give great advice on that, and I'll just double check, make sure we've got enough.
Okay. And I think we're close. I just think that maybe we need to move things around and what Pat was saying about moving the tables up to the front. I think that's a good idea. So I think we're close, but I don't think I'm ready to approve it tonight.
Okay, any other comments down this way? No other comments? All right, so it's listed as an action item, but we can defer it. So as of yet, I'm not hearing a motion.
I move that we defer this until more design review can be done and maybe some more outreach.
I second that.
Okay. Any other discussions on that? Do you have enough specific direction on our comments to?
The nature of the outreach would be helpful. What you're looking for. I heard you reference 3 or 4 would be better. So you give me some guidance on.
Well, happily, I think we've gotten some outreach tonight and through the mail. I just mean in general now, I think we've increased the amount of outreach that we do as we're redesigning a park. So, and I do respect the fact that it's smaller, there's less design that has to go on there. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you thought it was appropriate to take a redesign back to the community group, that would be, an easy way to do it.
And as part of that process, some of the questions that I would like to know the answers to are understanding why Scott Park is better than Heritage Park for bocce ball in the bocce enthusiasts' opinion. Getting a sense of the community's preference regarding the picnic tables, for either moving them or lighting them or eliminating them, or what flesh that out a little bit further. Whether or not the community feels the same way I do about sand, and how much bike parking they think is important to have.
Can you repeat the last one? I'm sorry, I missed the very last one. Bike parking.
And that's it.
Well, then there's this other just hanging issue of, even in that small park, is there enough open space, green space that isn't going to be, covered by DG or something? Okay, all in favor of that motion, say aye. Any opposition? No? Passed unanimously. Thank you very much, and thanks for the public comment and public input for your letters as well.
Thanks, man.
It's really helpful.
Okay.
Thanks, Darren. Another long night. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
You can't go yet, Rob. All right, the next item of business is item number 6, which is any ad hoc committee reports and liaison updates. So people just jump right in. Okay. Councilor Schmidt.
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment from a council perspective. I look back at our June agendas, and there were 3 items that came from the commission to the council. The San Francisco Creek Weir, improvement on Eleanor Pardee Park, revised field and tennis court issues. And they were all approved unanimously by the council, most of them on consent calendar. And I think it's a reflection of the importance of the work you do, that you are doing an excellent job of hearing information, delving into it, questioning, see what alternatives are possible, trying to understand the questions that might be there, as you were doing tonight. And the council can't do that. And when you come with a recommendation that is approved unanimously, it is very helpful for the council to move ahead quickly on those things. Now, in August, we had the issue on the smoking ban. And that came out of a meeting where you had extensive discussions. But a lot of some of the questions you broke 3 and 3 on. And there were, a live debate, important debate on that. Now, I found at the council, the minutes were not part of the thing. So your discussions were not, a part of the information that went to the council. I assume that was just an oversight. But as the chair pointed out earlier today, your minutes tend to be very brief. And sometimes you don't capture the flavor of what were the 3-3, what were the issues that you split on and you could not agree on as a council. And I think it's very important that that type of information get to the council, maybe through the minutes. An alternate way is, if there is a real split, to ask for time for the council to present the 2 points of view that we're splitting there. And I think that brings that wealth of information to the council. They can then make the judgment, is it worth pursuing going further on this or not? But I think both of those are reflections of the fact that what you're doing here late on a Tuesday night is extremely valuable for the city making decisions on things like this. And the only question is to make sure that the best of your thought gets to the council.
Great, thanks for those comments. That was an unfortunate 3-2, I think it was, on one of those, because two of us, and it's rare that, you know, there's not 7 of us, or at least 6 present, and when that controversial thing came up, it was just too bad that that turned out to be only 5 people that night. It was extremely rare, but appreciate the council, from council. And we definitely need to get those minutes in front of council on any subject. And as you asked earlier tonight, when there was a non-unanimous vote, to have that articulated so that they have benefit of that, definitely. Ad hoc committees? They all went to sleep? Good. All right. That's good. All right, then we'll move on. Any comments and announcements is the next item. Commissioner Markovich.
Well, one of them was at that August meeting, we had 4 commissioners in the audience. We need to be mindful of the fact that we all can't sit as a group, because that can be perceived as a Brown Act violation, because people will go, oh, are they all sitting there talking? So if you come to a meeting for council and you see your fellow commissioners, sit somewhere else in the audience. We need to, you know, be a little more spread out, otherwise it could go horribly wrong. The Rinconada meeting that's coming up, is that still in the first week in September?
It's actually going to be Thursday, September 12th. I tried to get it for September 10th, which was the Tuesday, but unfortunately Lucy Stern was all booked up at that point, and I wanted to keep it at that location because all the other meetings had been there before. So it's Thursday, September 12th from 6:30 till 8 in the community room.
Okay.
We'll be looking at the final plan.
Okay. And I don't know if you're going to be announcing about the glass pumpkin patch that we always do every year. My question is, why was it moved to the last weekend in September when it's traditionally always the first weekend in October? Do you know why?
I don't know why. That's an art center event, but I'm happy to look into it and get back to you.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just have a couple of comments. First, I want to thank Councilmember Schmidt for following up regarding that smoking ban and making sure that our minutes were at places for the council, and also for giving us an opportunity to speak to our position. I really appreciate that. Announcement-wise, I wanted to let everybody know that the Greer Dog Park has undergone some changes. They've removed the grass turf covering that was notoriously muddy and disgusting at all times and costly to maintain. They've put in decomposed granite surfacing, as well as repaired the gates and added a bench and a trash can. So sorry, Darren's already gone, but I wanted to thank him for making that happen. Also, just as an aside, I heard on the radio today that NPR is creating a national database on accessible playgrounds, and they did a whole segment on playground development in Pocatello, Idaho, and an upcoming one in Salinas that those who are interested in that subject might want to look for on their podcasts. But also the database could be something that's really useful for us as we move forward, considering the Magical Bridge project.
Rob?
And just to I know it's late, so I'll be very quick.
There's one thing I want to add. I was just looking at the notes from last week. The Mitchell Park is still slated to be late November?
Correct.
Okay, and the fee for services, that went to finance on the 20th?
It did not go to finance on the 20th, so it is pending. It has not gone to the finance committee yet, and after it does, we can bring it to the Parks and Rec Commission.
Do we have a date for that fee for services?
It has not been scheduled.
Do you know, Greg?
Yeah, I think it is scheduled for the Finance Committee meeting.
Oh, that must have been recent then, because, I asked and it hadn't been. But do you know what date, Councilmember Schmidt?
It's probably October.
Oh, okay.
But we have one meeting in September, one in October, and I'm not sure which one.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Just really quickly, we have the Fall Enjoy catalog is out. Hopefully everybody's got it. First day of registration is this Friday for residents. Tomorrow we interview 3 consultants for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. I thank Commissioner Cromie. She's going to join us for the interviews of the consultants. So that's important progress there. And I wanted to mention the Moonlight Run's coming up on September 20th. And if you haven't run that before, it's a lot of fun. Out at Baylands Athletic Center, there's a 10K, 5K run and a 5K walk. So, thank you.
I had one more question about Monroe Park. They were supposed to be a meeting there on the 12th. Was there one?
Well, no, it got extended. So we had it this week, a couple of days ago. What is it today, Tuesday? I think it was yesterday. Yeah, I've been really busy. So we had a pretty good turnout of the neighborhood, about, I don't know, maybe in the end 9 people came. Unfortunately, out of the 9, only 2 of us received the notice in the mail, so I was a bit concerned about that. Even our neighborhood association head did not receive it, and we all of us who turned up live within 3 blocks of each other, and only 2 of us got it. I got it at my household, and I know that these people really do look in their mail, because sort of the more neighborhood activists were kind of showing up. So I was really concerned about that, and I'm not quite sure how we can investigate what was going on with that.
I think it has something to do with the mail, because we had like a stack returned to us. So I don't know if it's the post office, how they were, delivered, but we had a whole stack from all the residencies around that area, so I don't know.
And it's not a big area. It's a small neighborhood, so if you're getting a big stack returned, that's a kind of red flag to maybe hand deliver them or something.
What about email? I live on the neighborhood just across the creek, so we go across the bike bridge to Monroe Park quite often. Well, less so now because it's kind of decrepit, but when the kids were younger, we would make it over quite often. It's 4 blocks away or so. Is there any way to email people? We get emails I'm on the board in the neighborhood, and we get emails on various subjects from the city. So the city has our board's email address. Is there any way to, in addition to putting stuff in the mail, to email the board addresses that you already have?
Yes, we do that now. I think for projects in the size of Scott Park and Monroe Park and the Hopkins Park is that the design budget, well, as you commented on earlier when we were looking at the plans, they're not rendered. They're much more raw, basically, than what I would produce to show to the commission. So because of the size of the budget that's basically for the design aspect of it, a lot of those things don't happen. Just because the lead that are working on them, it's just not in their scope of work because of the small amount basically of revenue that they're getting for the project. So I think that has a majority to do with projects of that size and getting the word out about them. However, though, it's not very difficult to send to the main address of the neighborhood association and then have it dispatched out from there. That's what we've been doing for Rinconada and for Pardee Park and those things. So
But
it's definitely a possibility.
When you were saying before you do everything within one block of the park or so, is there to get the adjoining neighborhoods and email everyone that's within a mile of the park?
Because the people, if you send it to the neighborhood association, only the people who are members of that neighborhood association are going to get that email, and not everybody is a member. So,
well, that's always the difficult part, is the distribution list. I don't know how, when you send it on to that, I don't know what it's linked to or how it's actually being sent out, or if it's sent out at all. So that's definitely, a difficult part with the email list. That's why we would rather send out the mailer. And I don't know exactly, I guess there's a difference too. When Darren's in community services, those are community service projects, the Hopkins and Monroe and the Scott Park. My position is in public works, which are more larger scale capital improvement projects, so I can't speak to what the postcard looked like or the size, if that was supposed to be that way.
I got one. It was,
right.
It was this big.
Right. So that should have been okay. Our mailing list is generated off utilities mailing list. So if you're getting a utility bill, then you should be getting that mailer coming to you. So it's a pretty updated list.
Only if you're a block away, right?
Well, we use a GIS system basically, and you just draw a line around. So legally, 600 feet is the legal radius of notice for something like that. 600 feet's not very much though. So usually we make the area much bigger. Again, I wasn't involved in how the line was drawn to get the addresses. So I can't really speak to that, but it usually covers a lot larger area than just the 600 feet right around basically the location itself. So, but it would be interesting. I would like to see those returned ones because they shouldn't be returned in that mass. I don't know exactly.
I think
what's
that's a
happening
good
there.
start to start tracking it down because there's something going on with that.
Well, yes, I would say I am concerned about that because I think community meetings are important to the process of the design, and I like the more people, the better. The more minds in the room, the better. So that we should definitely look more into that and figure that out.
And the other thing, maybe this is more pertinent to small parks, but there is a fair amount of design that actually went into Monroe Park, more so than the pictures looked a little bit more evolved than even for Scott, although there were more of the pictures for Scott, so I don't know. But a lot of the comments were, we don't really want these things in this park. I mean, especially when it's a small park, because people get kind of attached to configuration and when it's a small park, there's very specific ways it's used. There's not a whole lot of options. And so I think we would have benefited by having some very early community outreach before you even hired the consultant. So I don't know if we can change that process or not, but it would have it will save a lot of money.
Okay. Ready to move on to the agenda for next month? Which means that Rinconada won't be coming back, right?
Not for next month, though. I would say the month after that, whatever that is. What is that, November? November, would it be?
No,
Yes.
October.
October, okay.
Okay, and we won't have fee for services. We just heard about that. But we'll ask about it again.
Yeah, well, if it's going to the Finance Committee in October, it won't be on our September agenda. So nothing's coming to mind right now as urgent for us in September, but...
Well, we got 2 months stuff done today, so...
Yeah, we got a lot done today. So, I'll talk to Darren, talk more with Peter, and perhaps the tree mitigation plan will be further along. The Commission's very interested in that.
I think we should include that as an action item on the agenda to designate a representative to participate in those constituent meetings.
Right.
Whether or not they have something to present to us, and then that representative can help make the judgment of when it's appropriate to come back to the full commission.
That sounds great.
Are we on the agenda right now?
We're on planning for the next month's meeting.
I had a comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
One agenda item that I would like to have is how we notice and handle this discussion of the ad hoc subcommittee reports. And I'm just wondering if we can talk about how that is on our agenda, because I'm a little concerned that we have these as discussion items, but we're not designating what the topic is. And some of these are more important than others, obviously, but I think we have some missed opportunities in terms of noticing the public on some of the bigger projects, such as the golf course reconfiguration. And because we've always called it the golf course reconfiguration, but it's really, once I opened up the DEIR, it's called the golf course configuration and the Baylands Athletic Center expansion. And we kind of got off kilter with that. I think part of it is maybe how we weren't really agendizing these topics and sort of tracking. Everything was pretty informal, and there's something nice about that, but I feel like we were a little bit led astray. So I just want to be able to talk about it as a commission, what we all think, how that would work with some staff input. And also as part of that, I'd like to also open up whether we need any reformation of some of the subcommittees on our commission as well. Since this is a discussion on ad hoc subcommittees, I was just wondering if we could talk about the process on the agenda, and then also just kind of revisit which ones we actually have. And in particular, I'm wondering if we should reactivate the golf course ad hoc subcommittee, just to throw that out.
So you're looking for an action item to as sort of a placeholder to figure out whether we need new subcommittees or reconfigured subcommittees or reestablished. And do you want an action item for acting on a process, or is that just a discussion?
I think that might just be a discussion on deciding how to do that.
So just so I understand, since I'm supposed to put together the agenda, the second one I think you're saying is, should we review action items for the ad hoc committee and therefore see if there's any that are missing or should be reactivated or something like that? That's the second part that you said, right? Which was something we talked about at the retreat in January. Okay, so that's the second part. And the first one is moving some items that would normally be in an ad hoc committee report to an agenda item?
Yes, and the reason I'm saying that is when you look at our agenda, we have Parks and Recreation Commission Ad Hoc Committee and liaison updates as a discussion item, but the general public doesn't know what any of this means when they're reading our agenda. We're not noticing them on what we're going to talk about. So
yeah, I'm not debating it. I'm just asking what you're
that's what I'm asking. So yes, that's what I'm asking.
Okay. I'm just wondering how much of that should be driven by the ad hoc committee or a ad hoc committee or just any commissioner if they have an agenda item that should be agendized.
Yeah, that would be part of the discussion.
Okay. Any other items right now? Otherwise, as always, you can bring them forth to me and or Rob.
What's the status of El Camino Park? Where's that sitting? Is that still?
I had a discussion on that a few hours ago before the meeting started with our council liaison, and he's going to check on that for us.
Okay.
And try to see where that is.
I can't speak to the scope of that what's going forward. I believe it's going forward as the original plan. So
going to council for their approval.
I believe council had the opportunity to speak on that.
Is this El Camino Park?
Yeah. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't have new information. We sent a memo to council asking for direction on this because we have not received formal direction to redesign the park to make room for the Julia Morgan building. So absent direction on that front, we would go with the design that was approved by council and by this commission. And the date we asked for feedback was by August 12th. And I haven't received anything. Greg hasn't received anything. I don't know if Councilmember Schmidt has heard anything. So my understanding then is we would revert back to the original plan, which is, I think, the one that the commission certainly favors.
Which didn't allow for any changes, right? I mean, you just said the Julia Morgan building, but also we've seen designs since then that included massive areas for theaters and stuff like that. And
right.
Without any change, we're going with the original plan. I'm just kind of feeding back.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
One question also, I stopped by with my daughter by across Alma, where that dog park was proposed. What was the regulation that prevented us? It was a pollution requirement?
Basically.
And there's no way that with drainage we couldn't, because it seemed like a pretty big area.
Yeah, that's what we thought to begin with.
Yeah, it was related to the proximity of the creek.
Yeah.
And so there's a rule that says within X number of feet of a creek you can't have any dog parks.
And it was quite significant, which just didn't make sense for.
But like over at Hoover Park, you're right next to the creek there. What's different about that?
It may be because the San Francisco is the natural trout run, and the creek running alongside Hoover is more of a culvert. It's cement lined. That might be the difference.
But
never mind the fact that the Creekside Park, which is all these little pocket parks that runs along the creek, all the neighbors are out there running their dogs there all the time. So you can't win either way.
But if you designed it so there's drainage, and the drainage would, instead of going into the creek, went into the sewer, you still can't build a dog park there.
I'm not sure that it's impossible. I mean, I think it's possible. What I believe happened, it just became sort of prohibitive. It was going to be more challenging. It was going to require significant permitting, and that's why we looked elsewhere to make that work.
Okay.
I thought also that Stanford basically said, no way.
They were
you
not
can't do that.
supportive.
We won't let you. And they own the land.
Oh, they own the land. And why didn't they want a dog park there?
Because of the environmental concerns.
Okay. And wasn't there going forward, we're going to be looking at the needs of the city for the parks? That's the master plan that we're starting next year. And when will the conclusions for that be done?
Of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan?
Yeah.
We're interviewing consultants tomorrow, as I said, and then hopefully within a month we can bring a contract to council, and then we think it's about a 12-month process.
Okay, so we're still a year out from that.
Yeah, we're a year away before we have a complete document.
Okay.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I second.
I'll move.
That shows how disoriented we are.
Such enthusiasm.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.